The protagonist was sitting on top of a mountain consisting of various artifacts. He was staring at his phone, which had a duplicate question about when he reads weblogs. The boy could do this in crowded transportation from the very early age, or during short retreats during the working day. He was thinking about this while sitting on a tall mountain of all sorts of things. The events of the webtoon took place in the heavenly castle called the Terrarium. On the outskirts of its territory, the protagonist of the story was about to engage in a confrontation. The guy had been waiting for this for a very long time. His name was Dean. He was a second-ranked swordsman. His opponent was also a swordsman. Her name was Nagi, and she was of the first rank. Our hero was also looking forward to their confrontation. And so the swordsmen Ding and Nagi finally clashed in a duel. Nagi immediately attacked the guy with a fireball, but Dean was able to deflect her blow without any problems. He swung his sword and almost approached his opponent. The next moment, his blade began to gradually pierce her body. After that, Nagi said, "Burning sword," in a cold voice. A sword stroke pierced the protagonist, and this attack became fatal for him. For Eddie Wyatt, this ending to the story was a real mockery of the readers. He read it because he was told it was supposed to be interesting, but he only got to the first chapter, and it was a real dud. It was a story in which the main character of the manhwa loses to a strong man. Eddie thought it was just bottom, so he wrote a negative comment. The guy wrote that if his comment was the best, whether with a flaming sword or not, he would wipe the bastard out. One person was extremely interested in this published commentary. The man was amused by Eddie's self-confidence. He was the first person to support this promising comment. Eddie believed that webtoons are read to relax, and that attributing the protagonist's loss to his or her revelation was complete nonsense. At that moment, a girl in a sports jacket approached Eddie and asked him to move his bag. Such an appeal from her came as a real surprise to him. The guy was embarrassed because he knew her. It was Una Stadler. Eddie wasn't sure if he should pretend to know her. Una was his classmate, and they were not close, but for some reason she sat down next to him. Una is quite popular among her peers, but she had nothing to do with Eddie. On that school day, she handed him a pack of cigarettes. Eddie didn't expect to get the same from her, so he asked her what he needed them for. Una replied that her class teacher had called her in, so she asked Eddie to keep it for a while and return it at lunchtime. But the guy did not understand why he had to fulfill her request. Laughing, Una replied that it was because they were friends. The sun was shining outside, signaling an active day at school. Eddie still took the cigarettes and wondered what he should do now. The girl could have kept them, and it was also strange what a high school student would need cigarettes for. Eddie watched his classmates make a fuss. Young Stadler sat at the third desk from the entrance, the place where she and the main characters of their class gathered. It was a little embarrassing to give away the cigarettes now, so Eddie decided to do it over lunch. Then one of his classmates shouted the phrase, "burning sword." It was a group of people discussing webtoons and the last chapter of what Eddie was reading. The guy came up to them and asked if they were talking about the player. He came right up to them and said that he had also seen him. Eddie started talking about the burning sword they had just talked about, and he noticed that it appeared in the last chapter. The boy wanted to express his opinion on why the main character used him in this chapter, but received a terse reaction to his opinion. This cold reaction made Eddie think that they might not have been talking about webtoon. Then he realized that it didn't matter what they were talking about. The point was that he had interfered, even though he wasn't even close to any of them. Eddie started apologizing for interrupting them so suddenly. But then Una dismissively asked her friends if they were looking at the same loser. These words became a real knife in the heart for Eddie. One of the guys asked his friend if he was in touch with Eddie Wyatt, and he sighed and said no. Another classmate also said that she didn't really communicate with him. Then it was Una's turn, and the black-haired guy asked the girl if she was talking to this guy. Eddie remembered Una smilingly saying that they were friends. But now in class, she said she didn't know who he was. Then his classmates began to ignore Eddie, talking about how they would be served rice prosecutors for lunch today. Then Eddie felt someone's hand on his shoulder, and he heard a guy ask if they were reading the weblogs. The blonde guy assumed they didn't and said he read them every week. Eddie cast a tense glance in Ellis Kelly's direction. His classmates looked at Ellis in surprise, but the next moment they were already actively talking. Eddie felt uncomfortable and began to move away from the company. Ellis watched him go with an intense gaze. Meanwhile, the number of likes on the guy's comments grew rapidly. The students started class outside, and Eddie felt very depressed. He was very ashamed, so he just wanted to stand aside. He wasn't surprised that Yuna was doing what was good for her, so he decided that cigarettes or anything else was none of his business. A teammate yelled to Eddie that the ball was coming his way. He asked him to quickly close the gate. Eddie was angry because now this ball would ruin his mood. Full of rage and enthusiasm, he was about to kick a soccer ball. However, it happened that the ball slipped right behind the guy, and at high speed he hit the goal where Ellis Kelly was standing. The neighboring team was incredibly happy with the goal they had just scored. Eddie's face began to break out in a cold sweat from the instant nervousness. He heard an angry Aaron start yelling at the boys. Eddie expected his anger to be directed at him and was going to apologize. However, Aaron passed him by. He asked Ellis how he could not block such a shot. The guy explained that he was too distracted by the webtoon. He apologized, explaining that he was too curious about what was going to happen next, and the guys asked him to be a little more serious. Eddie watched this quarrel in amazement, while the number of likes on his comments reached 67. The plot shifts to the school restroom, where Eddie is holed up. He flushed all the cigarettes Yuna had given him down the toilet. At the same time, he was reading a weblog that he disliked more and more. He was surprised that Ellis was distracted by reading this nonsense. Eddie still felt terribly ashamed that he couldn't hit the ball back then. Then he heard the other guys come into the restroom, talking about how they had lost and would have to buy the neighboring team ice cream. Eddie immediately recognized the voices of his classmates. Physical education was over, but the boys still didn't want to leave. Then he overheard Aaron talking about Eddie's intervention today. They expressed their dissatisfaction because he had interrupted the conversation in the morning. Patrick asked Alice why he was always covering for this Eddie, and today he is too. Aaron hugged Ellis and told him that he and Eddie went to high school together. The guy replied that they were not really close at all. He said in a supercilious tone that he just felt sorry for Eddie. Then the bell rang for class, and the boys remembered that they had a Korean lesson and they couldn't be late. Before leaving, Ellis glanced toward one of the booths. The guy breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that he hadn't been noticed. But then he heard Alyssa's voice calling the boy a pathetic fool. After these words, Ellis headed to the classroom. These sudden words made Eddie incredibly angry. He hates webtoons in which the main characters lose to the strong. He had his own personal reason for such disdain. That's because real life is full of defeats. Eddie clenched his fists and said that he had had enough. The number of likes on his comments has almost reached the 1 million mark. The boy also wanted to become the main character of his story. After this appeal, lightning struck the school from the clouds. The boy did not understand what had happened. He could clearly hear all the noise made by the other children. An unidentified voice told Eddie that as soon as he defeated the first-level runner, an unknown person would appear in front of him. Eddie recognized the figure of the girl who appeared in front of him. It was the same swordswoman Nagi from the webtoon. She asked the guy who he was. Then a sign with his information appeared in front of him. He had a student class and a lower rank. In the arena, it was announced that Dean could no longer continue the fight, so Nagi became the winner. The audience was dissatisfied because it was so predictable, but there were also those who were impressed that Dean was able to break through the wall of blue flames. The man believed that there was no point in it because the guy lost anyway. The blonde girl emphasized that she would speak only once and told them to listen carefully. She said that this was the first time in the history of fighting that someone was able to break through the defense of the wall of blue flame. She emphasized that her husband saw the historic moment with his own eyes. This was possible because Nagi had the first rank. The swordswoman had an imperturbable defense that no one could overcome. It was her technique called the wall of blue flame. It was the feature that distinguished Nagi from everyone else. However, the next moment, a strong lightning strike passed in front of the girl. Because of the impact, the audience could not see what had just happened. The blonde girl was confused and dropped her lizard. She was sad because she wanted to eat it later, and now she would not be able to do so. A neighbor asked the blonde woman if she had just said that it was the first time someone had broken through the defense. His eyes and voice were full of surprise, and he pointed a finger in front of them. They could not believe that the Nagi wall had been breached. The audience watched as some unknown person appeared in front of the invincible Nagi. His figure stood at the very center of her protective spell. Dean could not believe what he was seeing with his own eyes. After all, he, a second-level fighter, could barely hit the swordswoman's wall. And here comes a guy who could destroy it in an instant. But Eddie himself could not realize that this had just happened. He could not understand how this could have happened at all. After all, just a minute ago, he was sitting calmly in the toilet. He started looking around to see where he was. He glanced at the girl in front of him and remembered that it was a scene from the webtoon he had seen that morning. Nagi turned to Eddie and asked him to identify himself. The guy realized that if his memory was correct, he was looking at a character from the player. Eddie's face broke into a smile at the suggestion that it was all a dream. He turned to the swordswoman and asked if she was really interested in the identity of this body. He started to approach her and talk about lucid dreaming, but Nagi told him not to move. Nagi was a swordsman, a girl known for using the element of earth. Eddie defiantly asked what would happen to him if he moved. He knew that a swordswoman's strength was enhanced by her connection to the soil. The guy was thinking about getting even closer to her. Nagi threatened that if he took one more step, she would cut him open. In the next moment, the swordswoman used her wall of blue flame technique. It formed a circle of flames that enveloped the arena. This maneuver came as a real surprise to the audience. Dean was amazed that Nagi still had so much strength left in her, and he didn't understand if she ever got tired. The true strength of the wall was actually frightening. The audience realized that this cocky guy was definitely finished. They thought it would be impossible to stand up in front of that, but Eddie was quite unperturbed. Dean couldn't understand how this guy could stand up to such power. Eddie asked why the wind was blowing so suddenly and remarked that it was quite refreshing. From the boy's reaction, Nagi realized that he didn't want to back down. In this case, she decided to accept the challenge. The swordswoman pointed her blade in Eddie's direction, signaling the start of the battle. Dean also knew that if Nagi pulled out her sword, it meant she was wary. He could not have imagined how strong her opponent must have been then. Then Eddie turned to the girl and said it was a mistake. He began to think that even if it was a dream, it was somehow too realistic. But Eddie also had determination. He didn't want to be afraid. After all, even if he is a loser in his dream, how is he going to live his life? Eddie decided to put aside his fear, because it was just a dream. He was going to defeat Nagi. The guy took a swing and asked the swordswoman if she thought he was that easy. Eddie assumed that this might not be a dream, and that all his actions might be rash. Dean watched Eddie's senseless attack in embarrassment, but all of Eddie Wyatt's bravado had a basis in fact. The boy saw that Nagi's sword was not moving at all. It seemed as if she was not going to kill him. Then Eddie gleefully suggested that his opponent might have changed her mind. He decided that she was just scaring him and would let him live. But Eddie didn't know that everything had been decided from the moment Nagi drew her sword. And back then, there was only one ending for the guy: to be cut into pieces. The audience could not understand what had just happened in the arena. In the same calm and cool voice, Nagi addressed the commentator. She asked him to announce the results of the fight. The commentator announced that the girl's opponent could not continue the fight. And then he solemnly said that Nagi had won the fight. The viewer was disappointed that this was the end of the story. It was too boring, without any emotion, and different from what he had been promised. This ending was simply unacceptable to Eddie Wyatt. The guy woke up in an unknown space and assumed that he had died. He sadly realized that this was most likely his end. However, the next moment he felt the reality in front of him change again. A woman's voice from above ordered the exhausted boy to get up. Eddie was very scared when he saw an unknown person in front of him. The girl noticed that the guy looked rather stupid. She began to call out to him, but the guy only reacted with a bewildered expression. Then Eddie finally asked, embarrassed, what kind of place it was. After this question, he felt a hot flame clenching his throat. The girl said that she had shown kindness by looking after the boy who had come here without permission. And he dares to ask her questions and argue with her. She said sternly that Eddie had crossed the line. And squeezing his throat harder, she ordered him to just disappear. However, the next moment a man's voice told her to stop. And the fire that had been choking Eddie vanished into thin air. The guy fell to the ground, struggling to breathe after being strangled. The man apologized to him for the girl, explaining that she had been born recently. He said it was nice to meet you and was about to tell me his name, but then stopped. After a short pause, he said that his name was Arthur and he was the god of this world. The girl begged her master to let her go, emphasizing that Eddie had started the quarrel first. Arthur told her to calm down, otherwise she would lose face. He looked at Eddie's puzzled face and asked what was wrong with him. When Arthur leaned over to the boy, he began to apologize, saying that he had made a mistake and asking for mercy. The god of this world did not think that Eddie fully understood the situation and decided to explain everything to him differently. He called Eddie Wyatt by name and asked him to listen. Arthur held out his palm to the boy and told him that Eddie had been chosen for the job. Then he specified that he was chosen to become a player. Eddie asked if it was just a misnomer, and Arthur was surprised and assumed that the guy hadn't been reading carefully. The god of this world raised his palm up and said that he would show him everything. The Heavenly Castle Terrarium is a dream castle full of gold, silver, and the sweet feeling of victory. And those who want to climb to its top are called players. Dean, Nagi, and Eddie are all players in this universe. Arthur remarked that it would be cool if Eddie was a player like other people. However, the guy's reaction was not as expected. He asked exhaustedly why he was the one. Eddie didn't understand why he was doing this, and whether he would have to fight those monsters again. He yelled at Arthur, asking who was making such a simple statement and how he had decided that the boy would do it. But the god of this universe was extremely surprised by this reaction. He asked Eddie if he hadn't recently made a promise. It was about his promise to wipe Nagi into dust in the comments under the webtoon, but the girl was already in the terrarium, so Eddie had to become a player first. The guy didn't understand how all this could happen because of a comment. Then Arthur pointed his blade at Eddie and asked him if he had thought carefully before writing that comment. Eddie closed his eyes and was already expecting the worst. But then Arthur started laughing and reassuring the guy that he was only joking. He told Eddie that no one was forcing him to become a gambler and he could give up right now. However, the man did not think that Eddie would want to return to reality. After all, reality is full of evil people who despise it. And at that moment, the guy realized something for himself. Arthur sat down with Eddie and asked if he was going to return. At that moment, the guy felt much better. He turned to Arthur and asked him what he would get if he rose to first place. The man replied that he would give him anything he wanted. So Eddie agreed to become a player and they made a deal. Arthur cut a circle around the boy and said that he would now send him to the tower. He also emphasized that this was the only time he was saving Eddie. He would not be able to do it again, so he told him to be more careful. The man was about to start the transfer, but Eddie suddenly interrupted him. Arthur was disappointed because he wanted to make a cool thing, and Eddie asked him if he was going to send him away empty-handed. He did not understand how someone could be so irresponsible and still call himself God. After all, even beginner trainers get their first Pokemon, so Eddie asked for something to give him. Arthur wanted to answer that he had nothing to give him, but then they were interrupted. The girl who had recently choked him with fire approached Eddie. She asked the boy how he dared to address God so arrogantly. The protagonist felt that she had the same aura as his classmates. The girl told him to behave normally, and Eddie immediately bowed down to her. While Arthur was watching all this, a ringing laugh began to come out of his mouth. Eddie and his girlfriend noticed that his laughter was getting even louder. The god of this world said with a laugh that they were both so funny. After some brief contemplation, an idea came to him. Arthur asked Eddie if he had recently said he needed something. He grabbed the girl by the shoulders and said he could take her with him. However, both she and Eddie were extremely unhappy with the offer. The white-haired woman emphasized that she did not want to go down to the ground with this fool, and Eddie had the same opinion of her. But Arthur encouraged them to calm down. He threw the girl in Eddie's direction and emphasized that he had already made up his mind. The god of this world wished them to have a good time together. Finally, he said that the girl's name was Excalibur. No matter what anyone says, this sword was made by him, so it must be useful to Eddie. He also said that when they returned, they would owe him ice cream. After that, Eddie and Excalibur began to be transferred to another space. The guy was unhappy that there was lightning this time too, and asked reassuringly if there was another way. The guy heard Excalibur coughing next to him, and he thought it was a pretty stupid name. She could not understand how this could happen to her. After all, she had shrunk and now looked like a child. Excalibur is angry that Eddie is pretending not to know that he caused all this. She started beating him and someone was watching them. Arthur remembered that he had forgotten to warn them about something before he left. Eddie looked around the place and assumed that someone lived here. The god of this world believed that it would be very boring without trials, so he prepared a quest for them to begin with. Excalibur was still angry that she was small, but at that time a giant approached her. The girl asked Eddie why he looked scared and didn't answer. The boyfriend noticed that an unknown man was going to hit her and told her to be careful. At that moment, the Excalibur bounced away from the sight of the powerful impact. An unidentified man began to strike him hard. The girl jumped away from the attacker and told Eddie that she did not have time to notice the unknown man at all. The boy asked the stranger who he was and what they had done to him. The attacker in the boar's skin was surprised by this question. Members of the Red Hood's Thieves Guild replied that they should ask them the same question. Red Wolf told the invaders that they would pay for breaking into this place. He asked the children in a menacing voice if they were ready. The man ordered the guild members to grab the girl first. 4 thieves simultaneously rushed to the Excalibur. The girl remembered the reason why she disliked the land so much. Eddie asked what they should do now, and Excalibur angrily replied that they had only one option and told him to hold on tight. But the guy couldn't understand what she meant and what he was supposed to keep. Then the girl's body burst into flames. After that, the first outlines of a blade appeared in Eddie's hands. Members of the Red Hood's guild could not understand what had happened to that girl. Now Eddie had a weapon in his hands and he was sure he could win. However, it was not that simple, because after the fire had dissipated, he was holding a decrepit sword. Eddie was disappointed to realize that he was definitely finished with this weapon. Excalibur is the sword of the ego, and is also known as the sword with a soul. It is a sword that grows stronger with its wielder, a legendary sword with unlimited possibilities. However, this also means that he has now become as weak as his current master. Eddie Wyatt had a class of apprentice. His rank was novice. Excalibur could not understand what had happened to the shape of the sword. It was just horrible. She couldn't believe that she had become so worthless. She hid in a corner and said that it was over and that she wanted to go home, and Eddie asked her what they should do now. Excalibur replied that he could do what he wanted, and now she wanted to be alone. The Red Wolf watched all this angrily. He said it was pretty stupid. He was wondering what they were, but it turned out they were just garbage. The Red Wolf threatened that in this case they would pay for sneaking into the Red Hood's territory, and the guild members told the children not to dream that they would leave here in one piece. Eddie got scared, realizing that he was surrounded by a whole bunch of psychos. He realized that he could die again now, and he needed to get out of here no matter what it took. Then the guy saw Excalibur heading in the direction of the attackers. The girl was very angry that they called them garbage. She asked how dare they put her on the same level as that loser, pointing to Eddie. The guild members were amazed at her strength. They even had trouble standing and assumed that she was a runner. Arthur was a little disappointed that Excalibur had retained his power. The angry girl stretched her hand forward and told the villains to die. The ground under their feet began to crack, and an incredible aura emanated from the girl. The commander was amazed by Excalibur's abilities, but his men said that now was not the time to be surprised by her power and that they should flee. Excalibur said that it was too late to run away now, and that today was the day they would die. However, Arthur did not like this development at all. He made it so that Excalibur could not use his power. She didn't understand what had happened to her abilities because it shouldn't be like that. She looked away from her opponents in embarrassment, and that self-confidence was gone. The Red Wolf sternly told his subjects to destroy their enemies. Eddie couldn't understand what was wrong, and whether Excalibur couldn't use his power, the guy himself was about to quietly escape. But he realized that it would be unfair if he went alone. However, the guy immediately changed his mind when he saw the enemy's fierce gaze. Excalibur asked Eddie if he was already shaking with fear. She turned to the boy to inform him that they had nothing left to do, and that he could take on 1 or 2 small enemies. However, she noticed that there was no one else where Eddie had been standing. The guy was not crazy enough to fight such enemies because he would not even count his bones later. Eddie noticed that it was too quiet and assumed that something had happened and that Excalibur might have been caught. He thought that if he came into this world, something would definitely change in his life. He thought that Excalibur was very strong and that he would only hinder her. But nothing changed at all in the guy's life, and as a result, a weakling like him just ran away. Eddie believed that there was nothing he could do to help the situation because he was just a schoolboy. He began to think that it would be better if everything remained as it was before. However, then a voice rang in his head, asking Eddie if he was going to run away again. This voice contemptuously called the boy a pathetic idiot. Excalibur got very tired while fighting the enemies. Red Wolf said that he thought that such a pretentious and self-confident girl would be able to produce something worthwhile, but she turned out to be just a weakling. Excalibur noticed that this was a man talking to her, for whom all the work was done by his henchmen. The Red Wolf said that it was really a pity that such a little one's life would end. Excalibur was thinking about what would happen if she could use her power at least once. She was already preparing for the worst outcome, but then Eddie came to her defense. Excalibur asked Eddie why he came back, because he was always running away like the last loser. She wanted to say that she could have gotten away without his protection. Eddie asked pitifully why it was impossible to be a loser in this world. The girl's voice became kinder, and she replied that it was not forbidden by law, pushed the guy away and told him to let her stand up. Then she held out her hand to the boy and turned to Eddie, offering him a try. At once, Eddie was struck with incredible determination and agreed to her proposal. Eddie and Excalibur shook hands in a friendly handshake. Arthur was pleased with this alliance and announced that they had passed the test. Red Wolf could not understand where this incredible power came from. He assumed that it was a Nagi rank 1 power or even higher. The only person Eddie needs to defeat is the weakling inside him. He promised that he would definitely climb to the top of the terrarium. Excalibur gave only half of its power to Eddie, but he decided to take all the strength God had left in her. The guy turned to his rivals and told them to attack. Members of the Red Hood argued among themselves about who would go first. The Red Wolf told them to get lost and that he would deal with him alone. The commander said that he hated those who only knew how to rely on their trinkets. He emphasized that this is the reason why he created his own thieves' guild. Red Wolf told Eddie to watch carefully how to use his power. The thieves praised their commander for always being confident in his abilities. The Red Wolf took a block of earth and said that it doesn't matter whether it is the sword of ego or not. It is just a knife. After all, if Eddie can't get closer, there's no point in it, and with that, the opponent threw a huge piece of earth at him. The Red Wolf wished the boy to die peacefully under a stone, and he would sell his precious sword. Eddie clutched his sword and was about to swing it. In this way, he was able to deflect a stone block flying in his direction. The members of the Thieves' Guild were incredibly shocked by what had just happened. The next moment, the ground gave way under their feet, and they were pierced by an incredibly strong sword blow. Eddie could barely stand up after the blow of such force. After that, his body began to sink to the ground. Thus, the boy completely defeated his rivals. The liquidation of the Red Hood's Thieves' Guild was completed. Arthur was happy to watch this fight. He noticed that it was much more interesting. The man was relieved because now all the candidates had been gathered. And finally, time in his created world will begin to run its course. Far away in the woods, a cart driven by an old man was passing by. This cart was filled with a creature called Moiko, whose peculiarity was that she was a sweetheart. Willius was 86 years old, a carrier by profession, and his quiet life was in crisis. The reason for this was 30 minutes ago. He was combing Moiko's hair and was about to return. Then a girl approached him and asked him to give them a ride. Willius was unhappy with this rude treatment. He asked if she had a grandfather. It was Excalibur with a wolf skin on her shoulders and a sack in her hands, dragging Eddie behind her, and she said that she had no grandfather. The old man got scared, thinking that she was dragging a corpse behind her, and said that she could sit down without any problems. Willius recalled all of this, and Excalibur displeasedly told him to drive faster. He was thinking that if he were 50 years younger, he would have given her a good beating. Willius watched with fear as Excalibur tried to wake the boy up. With tears in his eyes, he decided that it was better not to interfere. Eddie has not moved once since he lost consciousness. Excalibur hoped that this did not mean he was dead. It's not that she didn't care whether he died or not. She didn't know what would happen to her later and whether God would take her. Then Eddie finally came to, and his first words were fried rice with squid, which scared the girl. The guy said that he doesn't remember anything since he picked up Excalibur, but he also noticed that he remembered something cool happening to the girl. Excalibur told him to forget about it, because if he doesn't remember how he did it, it's no use. The girl suggested that it could have been an accident. But then I rejected this idea because you can't use it just by luck. She didn't deny that Eddie Wyatt looked like a choker, but at that moment he did not kill any of his enemies. This meant that the boy could fully control the power of God. Then the guy suddenly said that he remembered something else. Eddie thought it might not be too important, but Excalibur told him not to delay, because anything could help. He recalled the moment when the girl had held out her hand in friendship. Eddie sincerely thanked her for believing in him. For Excalibur, the words of gratitude came as a real surprise. The guy stretched out his hand to her and tried to say her name awkwardly. They started arguing about her name, and Willius was annoyed by the noise and wanted to get back to the village as soon as possible. Excalibur beat up Eddie for calling her name Kringle and said that he had a weird name too. Eddie's expression changed and he told the girl to look back. Excalibur told him to shut up and threatened that if he didn't want her to beat him, he should learn to shut his mouth in time. Still, she looked back at his request, and they saw the entrance to the village in front of them, with an incredible tower in the middle of it. Eddie looked miserably at the things he had come here with and wondered what he should do now. He assumed that he should get a job as a flooring worker, even though he had never worked before, and he wondered if they accepted miners. Then he looked at the haughty Excalibur, who had managed to steal a lot from her enemies. Among the stolen goods was also a pile of gold, and Eddie was glad that he didn't have to worry about money and praised the girl for her work. Excalibur emphasized that he should now understand why he should listen to her words. The girl said that it would be nice to find a place to eat first, but then she heard the old man screaming. Willius turned to the guards and told them to grab the two as soon as possible. He emphasized that these little devils threatened him. Excalibur said that there were no threats, she just asked her grandfather, and he immediately agreed. Eddie also asked them to listen to the fact that he was unconscious and a victim as well. The guards and Willius watched in awe as Excalibur beat Eddie. My grandfather said that there was no need to pretend, because everyone knew that they were in it together. He showed me a wanted postcard as evidence and said they were from the Red Hoods Guild. But the children objected, claiming that they had nothing to do with these people. However, both Excalibur and Eddie were wearing the capes of thieves from this guild. That's why they were mistaken for thieves, and the guard asked if they had lost their fear. And then he ordered his subjects to surround the cart with the thieves. The girl realized that they were now in a dead end. At that time, an unknown man was watching them from above. Fellow travelers asked what was going on, and some assumed that it must be because of the offenders. Excalibur said that these fools had no idea who they were dealing with. She hoped that Eddie was not going to run away again in a panic attack. Then he jumped out of his seat very sharply, which scared the girl a lot. Eddie slapped his palms over his face to gather his strength. He decided that he would not run away. He was ashamed of himself because he wanted to hide, but he would not do it. They were stopped only because they were mistaken for thieves, and if they explained everything properly, the guy was sure that they would be fine. The guard ordered the children to put their hands behind their heads and come down. Eddie made a halting gesture, telling Excalibur not to worry because he had an idea. He asked to leave everything to him. However, the girl did not listen to him and immediately jumped off the cart. She told the guards that today they were in a tough spot and had no idea who she was, and that she would make xylophones out of their teeth. Eddie closed his eyes, trying not to look at her. He realized that it was simply useless to negotiate here. Excalibur quickly jumped on one of the guards. The girl felt the power. It cannot be compared to her previous abilities, but it is not bad. Even without the power of God that Eddie Wyatt used, this will be enough. The commander told the guards not to be afraid, because she was not one of the players. Excalibur mentioned that a player is what God told Eddie Wyatt about. The girl didn't really know what these players meant, but she secretly told the guards that she was stronger. She took off her wolf skin and threw it in the direction of the enemy. After that, she approached one of the guards and took the spear from him. Excalibur easily dealt with the second of the enemies. Then she swung and threw the spear in the direction of the other. The guards were weaker than she thought. Even those in red were stronger. Excalibur realized that if this continued, it would not be so difficult to get to the first rank. She saw a crowd of guards and assumed they were up to something. The commander ordered his subject to hurry and call Mr. Ran. After these words, Excalibur instantly approached his face. She asked who Ran was and asked him to bring her to her. She emphasized that they might at least have a conversation with him. Eddie tried to say something to the girl, but his tongue was tied up when he said her name. The guy called her Kali and told her to be careful. Excalibur didn't even have time to notice when a new enemy approached her. Then Eddie Wyatt shouted her name at the top of his lungs. The girl gradually began to disappear and turn into a sword. The next moment, Excalibur was already in Eddie's hands. The girl was unhappy that he called her without permission. She said that she actually saw them coming from behind and everything would have been fine. But the guy said he didn't think everything was normal. Excalibur was furious that Eddie dared to argue with her. She asked what a loser like him could possibly understand. The guy didn't deny that he was a loser, and then asked her if she knew what was most important for losers. He replied that the most important thing for them is to look at the victim as he catches the eyes of the hunters around him. And in the classroom, you could tell by the eyes who was the biggest fish. Eddie said that his loser instincts told him that this man was really dangerous. Kaylee gave an embarrassed look in response to these words. But then the girl felt that the ground in front of her seemed to be moving in different directions. All the guards and travelers began to scatter as Meister Ran joined the fight. Ran was one of the players who belonged to the Guardian class, and he said that this would not happen next time. Eddie was amazed that this man could just cut the ground in front of him with a cloth. Kaylee noticed the boy's anxiety and told him to get ready. She had already told him not to be afraid of anything, and Eddie said that he was not afraid of anything. The girl told him to beware of that cloth, because if it wrapped around him, it would be the end. Eddie replied that even a fool would have understood that, but he was feeling incredibly scared. But now the guy can't even run away, so he has to fight, and Excalibur was quite heavy. It was hard for him to even stand. He was interested in how God wielded the sword as if it weighed nothing. Kaylee told Eddie that at his level, he could use it for no more than 2 minutes, so he needed to stop thinking and start acting. Then the boyfriend asked her embarrassedly if they had to fight. But the girl didn't understand what a stupid question it was, because they had come so far and Eddie was still afraid to fight. That wasn't the point. Even though Eddie was afraid to fight, he was really wondering if they had to fight. But for Kaylee, these words seemed like real nonsense. The guy said that their main goal was to climb the tower and find Nagi, and if they started a fight, it would be difficult to get into the city around the tower. And besides, if they are lucky enough to defeat Ran, the guy will pass out again and the game will be over. Excalibur asked him what he was going to do then, whether he was going to drop dead on the ground right there. Then Ran said in a stern voice that he was reporting. Kaylee immediately felt threatened and warned Eddie Wyatt about it. Ran said that their crime was an attack on a control point and resistance to the performance of official duties. He also added that the third crime is attempted murder. Eddie felt the enemy's fabric appear around him. It immediately wrapped itself around the guy's body and prevented him from moving. Ran said that thieves have the right to remain silent. He also added that in case of disobedience, the authorized player Ran has the right to carry out the death penalty. Eddie clearly realized that something had gone wrong. He saw no one else but that guy, as if they were the only 2 people left in the world. In his presence, the atmosphere became very heavy, and that's exactly what the people who climbed the tower were like. Excalibur asked the guy how he was feeling, and he replied that he couldn't even move. However, he tried to resist and clutched his sword. And the next moment, Eddie managed to escape from the enemy's trap. Ran said he had already warned the boy that he should not resist. He said that according to the law, he had to punish the guy. Excalibur wanted to say something to Eddie, but he already knew what to do. It was not the time to argue over trivialities, otherwise they would both just die. Eddie realized that he had to fight. He clenched his sword in his hands, and his body was filled with incredible strength. Kaylee was very happy that the boy would finally be able to use her power. A strange feeling pierced the wound, as if he had already felt this power somewhere. Eddie's body was overflowing with energy. This is the power of God that Kaylee was talking about. Now the boy was sure that with this power they could defeat the opponent. However, right before the impact, he saw that there were still people on the ground. The guy did not understand why they were standing there and did not have time to run away. Excalibur asked the boy what he was doing because who the power like that? The girl asked how much doubt there was and whether he had decided to die before they finished him off, but the guy replied that if he attacked, people could get hurt. Ran was also surprised that his opponent decided not to fight. He started to approach the guy and said that he had missed his only chance to win. After that, Ran threw his opponents into the ground with a strong punch. The fellow travelers were worried because it was quite painful, and he wondered if the guy had died. Player Ran realized that the guy in front of them was definitely dangerous. After all, he fell from such a height, but still managed to survive. The man grabbed his weapon and was about to strike again. Kaylee was worried because she hadn't looked after it and couldn't have imagined that this would happen. Everyone was prepared for the worst, but then the curly-haired girl stood up to defend the children. No one expected Mochiko to stand up for Kali and Eddie. Ran saw Mochiko and stopped. He didn't understand why this animal stood up for them. The travelers were also amazed, as it was the first time they had seen a peaceful animal intervene in a fight. People wondered if the fight would continue, and someone said that no matter who Mr. Ron was, he would not do that. The man landed on the ground in front of a peaceful animal. The next moment he knocked Kali out with his cloth. The man ordered his subjects to send these children to prison and punish them according to the law. And on the same day, Eddie and Kaylee were sent to the local prison. Ran reported that Mochiko blocked him, protecting the criminals. The man behind the chair asked him if he hadn't gotten confused again and attacked innocent people, because why would Mochiko defend criminals? Ran said that these children had attacked the main gate, and he also held out one thing and said to look at it. He was holding a tie that belonged to that guy, and he had never seen such a cut before, so there could be no mistaking it. Something was definitely wrong with it. The other man started laughing when he saw the tie. He thought he would never be able to see that guy again, so Ran asked if he knew him. Dean asked Ron if he remembered the guy who broke through Nagi's wall. He also added that, whatever the case, you need to visit him in person. Eddie told Excalibur that this prison looks pretty rotten. He also added that the girl was just incredible then, because she overcame so many guards, and that the players were not as tough as he thought. Eddie emphasized that if he had done a better job of attacking, they would have beaten him, but there was no response from Callie. The girl finally opened her eyes and threw a contemptuous look in his direction. Eddie realized that Kaylee was definitely annoyed now and that he was going to be in trouble. He was fully aware of his guilt, because otherwise he would have hated himself. The guy realized that if he hadn't doubted then, they would have won for sure. Eddie started banging his head against the wall, wishing himself dead. However, Excalibur distracted him from this activity. The girl gave him an embarrassed look and began to apologize to him. Eddie couldn't understand why she was apologizing to him and asked her why. He assumed that the girl was just mocking him or trying to calm him down. Callie replied that she was just accepting reality, because she was the first to get into a fight, so she needed to apologize. But despite her apology, she still hit Eddie to keep him from relaxing. The girl emphasized that she would not limit herself to mere words and would take full responsibility. Then she pointed her finger at her face and told the guy to hit her once. Eddie couldn't realize what she had just offered him. The guy was surprised and thought that she had no other options in her head but to solve everything by force, which is why she always lunges at everyone. And instead of hitting the girl, he simply asked to be allowed to call her Kaylee. Eddie explained that Excalibur is hard to pronounce, and when he is in a hurry, his tongue gets tangled, so instead of apologizing, he asks for permission to shorten her name. He asked me if it was weird. He thought it sounded pretty cool. Kaylee said that she accepted his offer, that it didn't matter to her. The main thing was that they had worked it out. She went to the wall and said that the most important thing now was to get out of the prison quietly. At the entrance to the prison, there were 2 guards who were falling asleep on the move. Then Ran approached them, noticing that they were very tired. The guards did not expect Mr. Ran or even Mr. Ding to appear before them. They started to apologize for almost falling asleep, but Dean assured them that everything was fine and asked if they had noticed that it was too quiet and empty around them. But Ran aggressively pointed out that only these idiots had quiet and empty heads, and the guard realized that he would have to write an explanatory note. Dean didn't want to make a big deal of it and asked the guard where the children who had been caught at the gate today were. The guards were about to answer where they were, but then an explosion was heard in the prison building. Dean was amazed that the children could make such a hole in the wall. The guards were already preparing to die. But because of all the noise, the guy has no choice but to catch them again. Eddie asked the girl to run more slowly, because he had trouble with such a load right after he used his power. The children failed to realize their intentions because Ran immediately noticed them and used his power. Kaylee felt her body become incredibly heavy at that moment. Eddie couldn't understand what kind of power it was. It felt like everything was covered in lead. He tried to move and found that his fingers moved normally. He realized that what was really heavy was his own clothes. Ran told the children to surrender because he had already spotted their belongings, which meant that they would be under his control for at least a quarter of a day. Eddie replied that they did not belong to the Thieves' Guild and that they had come to climb the tower. Ron was not satisfied with his words about wanting to climb the tower. He replied that in this place, in the village around the tower, there are many insects like them, and when they see the terrarium, they want to climb up there. I also noticed that if they really came for this reason, then they should just give up. Ran said that the tower is a place for players like him, and they are just kids who can't even fight back. He emphasized that they would never be able to get to the tower. At that moment, Dean appeared next to Eddie and told Ran that this was enough. He turned to the boy and asked if his name was Eddie Wyatt. Eddie immediately recognized the player who had just appeared in front of him. He was the person who was competing against Nagi at the time. The guy said his name was Dean, and added that he was pleased to meet him. Ding then added that he was also the king of the village. Eddie was scared because they couldn't handle one player, and now another one was coming. The guy's whole body was breaking from the force used. He asked what they would do with them. Then Eddie felt his strength leaving him and passed out right under Dean's feet. Dean himself was still thinking about what he should do with them. A few hours later, Eddie woke up surrounded by women styling his hair. The boy could not understand what was happening. A bunch of children gathered around him and called him their big brother. They asked the boy where he came from, and one of the boys noticed that Eddie's clothes looked silly. Excalibur turned to Eddie and told him to eat because the food here was really good, and he was surprised that the girl was also here. The guy asked what had happened and where they were, and Kaylee replied that she didn't understand anything at all either. Eddie did not understand what she was saying and said that this was not the time for her to be talking and that we should run away from these monsters. Ran was standing next to him at the time, and he asked if he meant him by monsters. He gave Eddie a stern look and told him that if he was already awake, he should follow him. Before leaving, he emphasized that Mr. Dean was waiting for the boy. Eddie listened to the man and followed him up the stairs. The guy did not understand why Ran was ready to smear him on the ground at first, but now he does not even look in his direction and how much further they have to climb. Eddie was also worried that Kaylee hadn't come with them, because without her, he was just another talentless schoolboy. When they arrived at the door, Ran calmly announced that they had finally arrived. He opened the front door and told Eddie to come inside. Dean was sitting on his red couch in the middle of the room in front of the window. He noticed that Eddie Wyatt had finally come to see him. The guy got up from the couch and said that Eddie had surprised him recently. After all, who breaks down walls so suddenly and runs away? Eddie began to apologize for the damage they had done to the wall. But what Dean meant was that this wall is not so easy to break down. He also noticed that Eddie had done the same thing with Nagi's blue flame wall. However, every time he uses his power, he loses consciousness. He approached the boy and asked him what his ability was. Eddie's body was covered with goosebumps and cold sweat began to pour from his forehead. He did not know how he should react to this and whether he should tell the truth. The fact that Dean is the king of the village does not seem to be a lie. Otherwise, why would Ran obey him? If Eddie keeps mumbling, Dean will sense something is wrong and get angry, so it looks like telling the truth is the best choice. But the boy didn't know if he was even allowed to talk about it, that his power was actually just a gift from Mr. Arthur. After all, Dean might not believe him. Dean asked the boy why he was thinking so hard and said that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to say anything. He noted that no one would have forbidden him to do so, because until the boy became a player, he was wise enough to hide his abilities, so Eddie asked him why he had asked him that. Dean winked at him and said he was just curious. The guy asked him nervously why he had called him here, and Dean replied that he had a job for him. But first he told Eddie to get his things and held out his tie, phone, and pen. The return of his belongings also meant that all charges against Eddie and Kaylee were dropped, and he immediately felt incredibly relieved. Dean said that the old man came and confirmed that the kids were not part of the Red Hood's gang, and Eddie was surprised because he had accused them. Dean didn't know his true motives, but he said that according to the old man, Eddie was the reason no one got hurt. That is why the guy wanted to meet them, but they immediately ran away. Eddie was glad that it was not in vain that he decided not to attack, so that people would not get hurt. He was incredibly happy that his action saved someone. Dean watched the boy with some surprise in his eyes. Then he recalled how Eddie had said he wanted to climb the tower. He said that he wanted to know the reason for this decision. He asked Eddie Wyatt if he could tell him about it. At that moment, Eddie had no doubts about his goal. He said that his goal is to take the first place in the player rating. He was able to answer this question with ease. He added that he also wants to break the strongest player, Nagi. Dean turned to Eddie and asked him if he wanted to see what was outside this window. The view from the window stretched directly to the terrarium tower. The guy pointed to the gate that surrounded the tall buildings. He said that everything behind those gates belonged to the Avalon Guild. He also said that this guild was under Nagi's leadership and noticed that the view was simply grand. At that moment, Eddie Wyatt realized the meaning of his recent words. To break Nagi means to break not only her, but also all those who are associated with her. This meant that Eddie challenged them all with his words. He began to doubt whether he could really do it. After all, he was someone who could do nothing even in the circle of his small class. Dean put his hand on his shoulder and told him that Eddie would need reliable backup. He gave him a friendly hug and told him that everything was settled now. Dean smilingly said that he would help Eddie get to the top of the tower. It was hard for the guy to believe what he had just said, but Dean said it was true because he liked Eddie. He also noted that their goals are similar to some extent. He started thinking about where they should start, and Eddie was having trouble breathing, so he asked him to let go. Dean asked the guy if he had already registered as a player candidate. Eddie sighed with relief that he finally got out of Dean's office. He had been quite tired during this conversation, but now he knew how to get to the tower. Then Ran asked the boy if he really thought he could do it. Eddie had completely forgotten that Ran had been standing outside the door all along. Ran emphasized that he had already said that the boy did not have the strength to get to the terrarium. And he added that instead of listening to his words, Eddie abruptly threw promises to the right and left. In a stern voice, he asked Eddie Wyatt again if he really thought he could defeat Nagi. Ran angrily said that the boy should not be so overconfident. He said that if Eddie wanted to, he could demonstrate his level again right here and now. However, at that moment, Excalibur interrupted their conversation. The girl was angry because she missed and did not hit Rana. She aggressively asked Ron who he was to dare to tell them what to do. Kaylee promised that she would make him regret it, and that they would become much stronger than him. Eddie also confirmed her words, saying that they would definitely get stronger and climb the tower. And then he added decisively that they would be able to overcome Nagi. Ran told the children that they did not understand the words at all. He could not understand why Dean liked them so much. Before leaving, he emphasized that he would keep an eye on them. He wanted to see how long their audacity would last. After Ran left, Eddie fell to the floor. Kaylee told Eddie to get stronger as soon as possible, because when she was strong, she would definitely paint the fool's face. The guy agreed to her offer, and also mentioned that Dean had recently told him something important. Eddie asked if this was really the right place for them, and Kaylee said that you could tell at a glance. In front of them was the very place Dean was talking about the first obstacle. The host noticed that almost everyone had already gathered. Then she announced the start of the selection of candidates for players. Eddie assumed that things were really bad because they couldn't find the exam location. Kaylee was angry because how was he going to get to the top of the tower if he couldn't even find a place to sit for the exam? The guy thought they would find everything very quickly. Then he remembered how Dean had told him to follow the people if he couldn't find it. Eddie was disappointed because he didn't know who they had to follow. He thought it was another one of the players' tests. Then Excalibur heard someone nearby asking another person if he should kill him. The man told Zanderkan to be patient and that it was not yet time. Kaylee was afraid of these unknown psychos who only talked about blood. Then a clever thought popped into her head. She suggested that they need to follow people who are similar to those ahead of them. A group of boys talked about the energy of the sword sharpened by God. Lou asked Dan if he was ready, and he said yes. The children saw a whole crowd of eccentrics heading for the gate. Kaylee exhaustedly asked Eddie if he really wanted to follow them and offered to go home, but the boy told her to gather her strength. Then Eddie felt a hand on his shoulder. A creature in a bird costume told the boy to get out of the way. Eddie immediately walked away and apologized to them. Excalibur angrily asked if she should deal with them, and Eddie told her to calm down. So they found a place where they would hold a qualifying exam for the players. Everything looked quite calm, and Kaylee thought she would have blown up half the people here if they were like that guy. Now Eddie knew that those weirdos were just as much a candidate for gambling as he was. He wondered whether they would be explained the conditions of the exam. The examiner, Momo, noticed that most of the participants had already arrived. Then she asked to be allowed to start the exam to select the players of Group C. Dean has already spoken about the criteria for selecting players. He said that there was nothing wrong with that, and that you just needed to show your specialness. The guy was sure that for Eddie, who can knock down walls with a single punch, it would be a piece of cake, so he didn't have to worry about it. He told his friend that he could walk there with peace of mind. The examiner, Momo, told the first participant that he was out. She started saying this to anyone she simply didn't like. The atmosphere pressured Eddie harder than he had imagined. The guy realized that the examiner was a player like Dean and Ran, and she must have some criteria. They just need to figure out which ones before they are expelled. Mom turned to the giant guy and asked if he would make the examiner look down at him. After these words, she told him to bend over. The guy started apologizing, and Momo asked if he meant that he wanted to fight her. But he said that was not the case. But the woman did not listen to him and took everything in her own way. Then she turned to everyone standing behind him and asked for their attention. She said that all of them, without exception, would be dropped. One of the participants was extremely unhappy because he had been standing there for 5 hours, and she just said that he was knocking it out. They wanted Momo to at least tell them what standards she uses to make her choices. Putting her foot up, the woman replied that she had her own standards. There was a loud explosion from the exam area that almost made Dean look at his food. Ran asked his master if he was okay, and Dean replied that he had both died and risen. The boy assumed that the explosion came from the exam site. This meant that things were going extremely badly again. Momo said that if they wanted to know the criteria so badly, she would tell them only once. The woman said that the level of the candidates can be determined by the examiner himself. The participants realized that this could mean that she was taking them straight from her head. Momo said that if they were not satisfied with something, she could deal with them all. She said that those who didn't want to leave could, while the rest of us had to get back in line. Some of the participants dropped out, while others stood in a line as the examiner said. The woman was frustrated that she had to show her strength to make them see the difference in level with their own eyes. But then someone turned to her in displeasure, noticing that she was sitting there smiling. It was Kaylee, and she had been trying to keep quiet for a long time, but the woman was getting more and more annoyed with her because she was doing this whole selection process as she pleased, as if they were some kind of slugs to her. Eddie tried to calm her down, but Excalibur told him to come to his senses. She said that if the selection of players they want to become is treated in this way, then she didn't think it was a bad thing. And then she asked the guy what he thought about it. Eddie Wyatt did not expect such a reaction from Callie. Then Momo stood in front of Excalibur. This time, the candidates were completely green, and she decided to give them the opportunity to experience everything on their own. The examiner said that if she wanted to, she could go to her, and if she touched even the tip of her hair, she would pass the exam. Kaylee was only more enthusiastic about the offer and asked the woman if she would keep her promise. The challenge posed by Eddie and Excalibur affected all participants. Someone was amazed at their madness and called them completely stupid. For some, this challenge did not work out well, and for some, it became a motive to keep going. Momo asked Kali if she was going to attack, or if they would stand like this until nightfall, and Kaylee said that she should attack if she had the guts. The woman said that she was not sure that the girl would survive it, and such arrogance made Kaylee extremely angry. Eddie tried to intervene and embarrassedly suggested that they resolve the situation peacefully. Before he could finish, however, a loud explosion rang out in the arena. It caused a lot of smoke, and someone thought that something might have exploded. But in fact, while they were talking, the golem simply fell to the ground. He was annoyed that this was the rating system for the praised players. They wanted to exclude him, but the guy realized that their criteria were pathetic to death. The guy told the examiner that he would exclude those who needed to be excluded. The girls didn't understand what was wrong with this idiot. The madman ordered Zanderkhan to kill the examiner. Momo replied that he was really pathetic if he thought he was expelled unfairly. She knew that it would have been enough to show them her abilities, but she realized that now she would have to get busy. However, the examiner didn't even have time to do anything when she saw Eddie running forward. He turned to Kaylee and asked her to help, because if this continues, others may suffer. The girl turned on Momo and admitted that luck was not on her side today. Now Excalibur was also going to get down to business. Then a guy came up to Eddie and told him that he had already made a lot of trouble, so now he should move over. He went forward and asked Eddie to wish him luck. Eddie Wyatt forgot that the situation was completely different now. The main difference was that the people around them did not need protection. A participant named Pastis had no trouble dealing with the golem. Kaylee was furious because she was just warming up, and Eddie was amazed at the strength of this guy. The attacking participant was very unhappy that his Zandarkhan was so easily defeated. Then someone asked him if this damage would be enough for him. Keenareel said that the guy was a candidate like him. I asked him why he shouldn't stop being so stubborn and just leave, but the madman told him not to order him. Keena replied that it was not an order, but simply an advice, and it was his choice to listen or not, but she did not think he would fight empty-handed. Other participants were also unhappy with all the mess he was making. The crazy guy threatened that they would see each other again, and then he would curse them all. He added that he would become a messenger of hell and eat their souls, and the other participants watched in pity. Kaylee said that the guy was nothing special, and Eddie said that he had distracted the examiner for a while. Then a man in a mask with a beak raised his hand and asked what they should do now. Should they stand in line again and accept unreasonable exclusions? This unknown man reappeared behind Eddie quite unnoticed. Most participants simply did not want to stand in these lines anymore. They didn't understand how they could get a pass to become a player. They also heard that some participants at other selections passed thanks to money, and that a friend of theirs from the Avalon Guild saw someone pass and was even told the reason. Eddie felt the situation was getting more difficult, and he wondered where the examiner had gone. Then the woman suddenly said that the participants seemed to have something to say. She stood in front of them right on top of the cut-up golem. Excalibur was unhappy that she hadn't even noticed Momo getting there. The participants replied that they had something to say and asked if the woman was going to do whatever she wanted again. They were not going to stand for it. The examiner only laughed eerily in response. It all happened too suddenly. Kaylee told Eddie Wyatt not to leave her side. Momo then told the participants not to worry because they had all passed. This answer came as a real surprise to them. The examiner said that the criterion for selection was resistance, standing your ground no matter what, the main quality of a player. Golem added that if they simply follow someone else's rules, they are not worthy of being players, so resistance became the first criterion for selecting candidates. Momo then asked if they had any other complaints, and the participants replied that it sounded pretty reasonable. But one participant found it rather strange, namely Kini Lilith. It wasn't really important, but the girl asked if there were too many of them. The examiner said that she was absolutely right. The number of participants was higher than she had anticipated, but the reason was simple. She emphasized that among the participants there were those who ruled the most. That's why they had another condition. If they did well, Momo would personally write a letter of apology. The woman turned to the children and asked them to tell her their names, and Eddie and Kaylee introduced themselves. The condition was that the children had to surprise her with at least one of their abilities. She promised that if they lived up to her expectations, she would accept absolutely everyone who was standing here. Eddie cheerfully asked his partner if she was ready to demonstrate their strength. Kaylee cheerfully replied that she was always ready. And then there was a strong explosion from lightning in the arena. The participants were scared of this. They hoped it was not dangerous. And some of them were able to realize what it was in front of them. They thought they were facing the same well-known weapon of the ego. However, the reality was more cruel, and he stood there again with a piece of wood, not a sword. The experienced participants immediately started laughing at him. The examiner angrily said that she was giving them only 5 seconds. Kaylee was also annoyed that Eddie couldn't do everything properly because he has the power of God. She also didn't like the fact that the impudent woman was also counting time. She ordered Eddie to do at least something, maybe some unexpected trick. He couldn't remember if he had one, because if he did, he would have used it in reality. But now he was just relying on Kaylee. But then Eddie remembered something and thought it could be used. Kaylee said that if she wanted to go alone, she could, but the boyfriend told her not to. He asked the girl to rely on him this time. Kaylee was a little surprised that he was asking her this. Eddie forgot about his reality because he was overwhelmed by the crazy flow of events. He stretched his hand forward, about to show off his specialty. Momo asked the boy if this was his specialty. Holding his smartphone in his hands, Eddie confidently answered that he did. Most participants could not understand what he was holding in his hands. Kaylee asked the boy what it was, and he replied that it was an object. The girl was very angry that he couldn't explain it to her properly, but Eddie said that she would just be very surprised when she found out what it was. Kaylee started shaking him and said that if she had known he was going to do this, she would have dealt with the upstart herself, because who would accept them looking at this ridiculous object? However, to her surprise, Momo happily informed her that they had been accepted. And if they are accepted, it means it's over. The examiner asked Eddie if he had anything else to say, and he replied that she hadn't even finished his explanation. But Momo asked him why he needed to explain. The woman asked him if he was holding a smartphone, and he wondered how she knew. The examiner came down from the golem and said that she would never have thought she would see this thing in person. And as a thank you, she kept her promise, but Eddie still wondered how she knew about smartphones. She continued to ignore him, and it annoyed him a bit. Then the examiner said that all the participants present were accepted. Eddie still begged the examiner to tell him how she knew about the smartphone. The woman replied that if he had any questions, he should look for answers himself. Finally, she told Eddie that she would see him at the final exam. And so the player selection exam was passed. When Eddie asked Dean about the smartphone, he said he didn't know what it was. As the boy knew, Dean had dropped out of the competition himself, so he didn't really know much about the world's newest products. He asked Eddie if he wanted him to ask about it, but the guy said that everything was fine and he didn't need to. Eddie thought it would be strange to ask for this, since Dean was already helping him so much. If there were people who also knew about smartphones, it meant that there might be someone else here besides him from the real world. Eddie couldn't believe that every time he thought about reality, he was scared, because he had promised himself to become different. While the guy was walking down the corridor, someone was watching him. He then went to the window and carefully jumped out of it. Then the spy quickly left Dean's house. However, he couldn't go unnoticed because Dean and Ran were just waiting for it. Dean ordered his partner to learn everything about smartphones. The spy said that Eddie had contacted Dean because it was very difficult to get away from there unnoticed. He added that if he hadn't had such a high class, he would have been caught. A man in a mask with a beak praised the boy for his work. He said he would pay the guy half if he got the item. The blonde guy said to trust him and wait. He would do his part, so there was no need to worry. However, it didn't happen the way he had envisioned. A masked man with a beak made a hole in his body with one hand. The guy's lifeless body immediately fell to the ground. The killer sternly informed that the location of the smartphone had been discovered and ordered his subjects to get it. And finally, he said that anyone who gets in their way is to be killed. As they had predicted, Dean was nowhere to be seen. Then the gang leader said it was time and ordered us to move out at the first opportunity. Dean was sitting on the table in front of a puzzled Eddie. He could not believe his own eyes and what he saw on paper. It was a 7-digit figure, 6 million in local currency. Eddie asked what it was, and Dean replied that it was their account. It was a bill for injuries to the city guards, for repairing the prison walls they had destroyed, and so on. And Eddie and Kaylee were his guests, so Dean exempted them from paying for room and board. Eddie asked about the jewelry they had brought with them, and Dean replied that their owners had been found because the Red Hoods had stolen all those things. Dean suggested that if the children worked hard for about 2 or 3 months, they could pay off the entire debt. It was too much time, because Eddie hadn't even gotten a step closer to Nagi, and Dean had said he would find out about the smartphone. But then his friend told him that there was a way to pay him back in 1 week. Hearing this, Eddie said he would do whatever they told him to do. The city was alive with activity, with children playing soccer and merchants selling their wares. Eddie and Excalibur walked unhappily behind Ran. The guy was very embarrassed. He didn't think he would have to chase after Ran. Kaylee quietly asked the boy how long they would have to follow Ran, but Eddie didn't know. The girl was annoyed that he hadn't even asked, and Eddie replied that he had learned about it suddenly and hadn't had time to ask. He also emphasized that they are mostly here because Kaylee could not restrain herself at the gates to the city, so she has to be patient. The girl reminded him that she had already apologized to him. Rana was very annoyed by their conversations. He turned around and told the children to follow him in silence. After saying that, Eddie immediately gagged them. Ran could not understand what Mr. Ding was thinking. He could not believe that the boy decided to send these 2 children on patrol. Dean had his own reasons for doing so, and he would have liked to look after them himself, but he would be out of town for a while. Ran suddenly realized what his departure meant. It was a sign that Dean's left hand was ready. So Dean asked Ran to look after the children while he went to get his hand on the 15th floor, and then he could take care of them himself. Despite this, Ran still couldn't understand why Dean cared so much about these idiots. Then the man felt something crash into him ahead of him. It was a boy who, due to inattention, did not watch where he was going. He started crying because he had ruined his hot dog. It so happened that the sauce from it remained on the clothes of the man in front of him. Eddie was immediately afraid of what was going to happen, and Kaylee predicted that he would not be happy about it. Things were bad, because Mr. Ran's character is too unpredictable and he would not let it go. But to their surprise, Mr. Ran simply walked right past the boy. Eddie didn't expect the man to leave it at that, and Kaylee was disappointed that he just walked away. His friends began to approach the boy. Eddie also asked if he was okay, and Kaylee was sure that he was fine, because Ran hadn't done anything to him or even killed him. His friends scolded Mick for daring to harm Mr. Ran. The girl emphasized that if he had been looking at his feet, this would not have happened, but Eddie was surprised, because he would have been better off asking his friend if he was hurt. The girl snapped at the boy, asking him what he cared about, especially since Mick was fine, not dead, and that was that. Kaylee didn't think that such little girls also cared about this fool Ran. It was a surprise to her. The girl was unhappy that Kaylee called Mr. Rana a fool and demanded an apology. The children reported that this man was very kind and constantly took care of them. Both Kaylee and Eddie were surprised by the announcement. Eddie noticed that the man was quite popular with children. Ran asked him why he was saying that and if he was trying to annoy him, but Eddie had no such thoughts. Ran emphasized that it is the guy who needs to worry about his high popularity. A whole bunch of little Mohicos gathered around him, and the boy didn't even notice it. Excalibur started laughing about the situation, but asked her to stop and help him. Ran noticed that Eddie now had a reason to be proud. This is because the Mohicos are intelligent beings from the heavenly terrarium. They rarely come up on their own, and it is difficult to even touch them. The wound failed to do so, and he stared at his hand in amazement. After a certain period of time, his guesses were confirmed. The man missed that it was no accident that Mohiko saved Eddie from him last time. The boy turned to Mr. Ran and asked if he could ask him something else. He asked if the man became a player to defend the city. Ran replied that without this power, he is nothing and he wants to live up to the hopes of those who value him. He confirmed that he was doing this to meet expectations. The man became a gambler to punish evil on behalf of the weak. As expected, Eddie had a hard time understanding his motives. But Mr. Rand did not expect the boy to understand them. Excalibur noticed that Eddie looked strange and asked what was wrong with him. At this time, the boy thought about what the man had just said. He realized that this is not what the weak want. Then, suddenly, there was a huge explosion in the city. It looked like a fire and was in the direction they were going. Ran was incredibly angry about this unexpected incident. This terrorist attack was organized by a group of people wearing masks with a beak. The gang leader told his partners to act and that he was taking Eddie Wyatt on. Upon hearing the explosion, the townspeople began to scatter in different directions. Eddie asked one man what was going on, and he explained that some psychopath was walking around the city and setting everything on fire. The guy was surprised that someone was deliberately setting fires in the city that Dean, a second-ranked player, was defending. Eddie asked Mr. Ran where Dean was now, and the man replied that he was currently out of town. The guy didn't understand why he was gone at that particular time, but Ran replied that the criminals were counting on it. He told Eddie that it would be his first mission to warn the guards and bring them here, and the boy asked what Mr. Ran would do. The man angrily replied that the boy was asking stupid questions. After these words, he immediately left his seat. Eddie thought it was stupid to go alone, and Kaylee asked him if he wanted to follow him. The guy replied that they needed to hurry and call the guards and added that he knew a shortcut. Ran was annoyed that he did not foresee this course of events, but went somewhere and did God knows what. But the man knew perfectly well that something was going to happen. He was angry with himself for not being able to fulfill his duties. Then Ran noticed several fire attacks flying in his direction. The criminal recognized Ran, the chief guardian of the village at the foot of the tower, and told the man that he was late. Then he turned to his subjects and ordered them to find someone. They rushed toward Ran, but were immediately overpowered by him. The criminal noticed that the fabric was difficult to set on fire. He also saw that he had taken down 2 of his men in one blow. He thought he had selected worthy young people and told Ran that he was worthy of his title of guardian. Ran angrily replied that he had to punish him. He attacked him and they started a confrontation. Ran had the advantage, and although his opponent was skillfully dodging, he managed to throw him into the wall. The man accelerated and told the thief that this was the end of him. But then the white-haired man's grimace broke into a huge smile. Because it was a trap, the other thieves immediately attacked Ran. But the man had no problem stopping them, sacrificing his own clothes. After this maneuver, the criminal admitted that his opponent had defeated him. He had no idea that Ran could control anything other than yellow fabric. Ran aggressively ordered him to tell him his target, and if the perpetrator did not do so, he would kill him. The white-haired man was surprised that his opponent spoke as if he would let him live even if he did. He told the guardian of Ran that this was his defeat. This is because they have achieved their ultimate goal. A man in a mask with a beak greeted Eddie Wyatt and said he was glad to see him again. The guy recognized him. He was one of the players they had seen at the exam. Excalibur told her partner that she had a bad feeling. This is because many other people have already surrounded them. Eddie apologized to the interlocutor and said that they were in a hurry because they had received orders to bring the guards. He said he didn't know what he wanted to talk about, but suggested meeting later. The interlocutor replied that this was not good because it was he who had started the fire. Eddie angrily asked why he did it, and the masked man said he didn't want anyone to interrupt his conversation. He added that thanks to the fire, no one will be able to come here. Not Ran, not Dean, not anyone else. Eddie Wyatt asked him what he wanted from him. The interlocutor liked that Eddie quickly understood the course of events. He stretched out his hand and asked for his smartphone, and if the guy gave it to him, he would let him live. The course of events is transferred to the 15th floor of the terrarium's heavenly castle. Marie Janos checked that the connection was working very well and asked Dean how he was doing. She was a mechanic. Her rank was 758. He agreed that everything was fine and told Marie to get it over with as soon as possible. The woman had already accelerated the process as much as possible, and now she was interested in how the village was doing, and Dean was surprised because it was not like her to ask about what was happening outside. Marie admitted that she didn't care at all. She was just afraid that he would pass out again, so she started a conversation about it. Dean noticed that the timing was really right and said he wanted to ask her something. He asked Marie if she had heard of a thing called a smartphone. The woman noticed that it was a hot topic indeed, if even Dean had heard of it. All she had heard were rumors. They said it could help awaken some special abilities or something. But the woman thought it was more important that the best solution was not to get involved with the subject. Eddie noticed that the other criminals were standing in a prominent place on purpose, as if to warn him not to even hope to escape. The perpetrator repeated that if Eddie gave the smartphone back, he would let him live. It was a real nonsense, because this psychopath set the whole village on fire. It was clear that he would kill them as soon as I gave him the smartphone. Eddie didn't know what to do, so he decided to just stall. He told them to wait, and that he was definitely putting the phone in his pocket. However, after these words, the guy immediately received a blow to the face. The criminal aggressively told me not to even try to play with him. He warned me that next time he would beat me to death. Excalibur was incredibly angry because he hit Eddie. The guy asked her to calm down. He said they would do as he asked. Eddie said that everything would be fine and asked me to trust him. Excalibur replied that everything was clear and told the guy to get up. Eddie started to get up and thanked the girl for her understanding. He understood that if he got into a fight with a man, he would fight to the death, and the boy had to prevent this under any circumstances until someone came to help. So Eddie decided that he would try not to piss him off and handed the criminal his smartphone. Then the little girl asked what they were all doing here. She turned to a man wearing a mask with a beak and asked him if he had seen the fire and said that now was not the time to talk. Eddie was incredibly shocked to see that girl next to the criminal. The man asked the child who she was and how she got here. The girl did not understand what he meant because she came here with her feet and asked her uncle if he was a fool. The criminal was furious that his subjects could not even block the road. The girl also asked if her uncle was not hot because his mask looked quite tight. She assumed it might be a cosplay, but the next moment the perpetrator's hand reached for her head. Eddie immediately responded and saved the little girl. The criminal announced that the negotiations were over and he would take the item from his corpse. Holding the girl in his arms, Eddie ordered Kaylee to run away. After these words, he threw a smartphone in her direction and ordered her to catch it. Kaylee grabbed it, recognizing that it was a good idea. A man in a mask with a beak immediately rushed to catch up with her. The girl looked back in his direction to mock him. But Kaylee completely forgot that there were other criminals in front of her. They attacked her and she started screaming in pain. To begin with, the perpetrator ordered her to break her wrists, and if she wanted to use a smartphone, it would be very uncomfortable for her. The criminals immediately rushed to execute his order. The man told Eddie that he was pretty pathetic if he just left the girl and decided to run away and asked if that was his whole plan. But in fact, Eddie's plan was completely different than he had anticipated. He transformed Excalibur into a sword, causing a huge explosion and attracting Rand's attention. The man saw lightning and thought it was Eddie Wyatt's power. The criminal was interested in whether this was the power of the smartphone that everyone was talking about. However, he noticed that the smartphone hadn't changed at all. This could mean that this guy has the light of the chosen one. Eddie told his opponent that with this sword, he only needed one swing to win. The girl asked the boy if he was also a player like Mr. Ran, but he told her to move away because it was too dangerous. Eddie confidently said that he was going to end it all now. The criminal ordered Eddie Wyatt to answer where he got this power, but the guy replied that it had nothing to do with him. Then he swung his sword and released a blow of incredible power. Meanwhile, Kina Reel has finally completed her search. Eddie Wyatt and the blow he dealt will serve as an even greater basis for change in the life of the village. People came to the Guardian Rand to warn him about something. The guards of the First Avalon Guild reported that from now on the situation is under the jurisdiction of the Avalon Guild. Ran was annoyed because all they did was stand by and wait for it to grow to such a scale. He said that they had no right to order him. The guard replied that they were not standing by, but were testing his abilities as a guardian and entrusted him with this task. The fire damaged the area outside the walls, and this problem is not only a concern for their village, so they were sent here. The guard said that at the moment the only one who was resisting was Mr. Ran. They repeated it again, saying that it was now Avalon's case. The guard emphasized that this was not a proposal, but a statement of fact. It seemed that Eddie had managed to overcome the masked criminal. He thought that he had fainted and assumed that this was the first time since he came to this world that everything had gone according to plan. But the guy realized that he shouldn't let his guard down and asked Excalibur if she was okay. However, the girl did not respond to his question. The girl Eddie rescued asked if he was okay, and he assured her that there was nothing to worry about. He didn't understand why Kaylee was silent and hoped it wasn't because of the injury. Eddie also felt like he was going to pass out himself. Every time he used his powers, Eddie relied on Kaylee, but now it was his turn to take care of her. He told the girl to get out of here as soon as possible. However, Eddie immediately felt an eerie atmosphere emanating from the man behind him. The boy threw the girl aside and immediately began to defend himself. The criminal was unhappy that Eddie dared to do this to him. Luckily, the guy managed to dodge his punch, thinking that his opponent was inattentive due to adrenaline. Now the criminal demanded that Eddie give him the sword. After that, he started attacking the guy even more. The little girl was incredibly frightened by what she saw. She gathered her strength and decided to run away. The criminal immediately noticed this and decided not to let her do it. Eddie noticed this and decided to protect the unfortunate girl. He threw the criminal away and shouted at the girl to run away as fast as she could. This was the second attack by Eddie Excalibur in a day. The criminal still stood his ground and ordered Eddie to give him the item. This is because he had to repay someone else with it. Eddie was surprised that this psychopath was back on his feet and thought he was some kind of zombie. However, at that moment he started to feel very sick. He began to think that any second now he was going to throw up. The next moment he fell to his knees in a huff. It was the same as the last time, although the guy was trying hard. He apologized to Kali for not being able to cope alone, because he could not even move a finger. But Eddie was glad that the girl had managed to escape. He hoped she would get out safely. He was very indignant about this injustice. He really wanted to protect Kaylee, just as she had protected him the last time. Then Eddie saw a familiar furry creature in front of him. He could not believe that he was seeing it in reality and thought he had gone mad. Kana appeared in front of him and asked if he had already decided to surrender. She noticed that he could still smile, even in that situation. Eddie recognized the girl from the exam. The perpetrator told Kina that if she didn't want to die, she should leave. But the girl asked him to stop talking because she had already seen all his abilities. Kina emphasized that they were quite bad. The girl asked if now wasn't the right time to stop trying to take other people's things. This angered her husband, and he ordered her to shut up. Then he demonstrated his strength and asked if she had accidentally come for her. The man wanted to attack, but the next moment someone was underground. Kana realized that he had an underground escape route and recognized that it was quite clever. She turned to Eddie Wyatt and told him that he should watch and learn. But the girl noticed that he had completely lost consciousness. The perpetrator shouted at me to remember that his name was Mezcal. He promised that one day he would kill the boy and take away all his power. And then he went his way to retreat through the sewers. In the same sewer was a man in an Avalon Guild uniform. He pulled his iPhone out of his pocket and admitted that it was all very boring. In the beginning, young Mezcal had absolutely nothing, even something that other people took for granted. And it was because of this injustice that he took it from them. Mezcal realized that this was not what he wanted at all. That day he just wanted to come up and take a closer look. The frightened boy begged his mother to open his eyes. That's how Mezcal's terrible journey began. He began to take everything from people to survive, and each time he promised himself that it would be the last time. But no matter how much time passed, he could not forget those eyes. He didn't want to do it, as if there was some kind of curse on him. It felt as if God himself had abandoned Mezcal. One day, a man told Mezcal that he was just like him and promised that he would provide him with men and power. And all you need to do is bring him one item. Mezcal did this and hoped that with this he would finally be able to repay the man. However, the man's plans were not destined to become a reality. An unknown guy approached him and told him that hiding in the sewers was the right place for a rat like him. But Mezcal didn't want to accept it so easily. It was that person's thing, and he felt he had to protect it. The man was able to resist such an attack, and the unknown man expressed his respect for him. He said that in this case, cockroach was more appropriate than rat. The stranger's gaze was incredibly cold and empty. Mezcal ordered the man not to dare look at him with such an expression. So the stranger told Mezcal to try to hold out against his magic until he died. And as a result, he could not resist his magic. The man wondered if Mezcal was really holding a real smartphone. At that time, one of the guards of the Avalon Guild appeared in front of Kina. The girl was also known as Kina Lilith from the elemental class. She reminded them that she had repeatedly refused their invitation to join the guild. Her father told Kina to be careful because that girl was a bloodthirsty woman. She was definitely up to something. The guard ordered Kina Lilith to retreat and asked her to understand them correctly. They were not going to attack her. Ran knew that these bastards from Avalon were just doing what they wanted, using security in the village as an excuse. Kina emphasized that even the nonsense they are saying has to have a limit if they are trying to attack not her, but the people, the defenders of the village, who are behind her on the verge of death. The guards told the girl that she was absolutely right. Kylie said that the people behind her were the source of all the troubles and that they were the reason the whole village was on fire. The guard told Kina that if she wanted to prove her innocence, she should leave. Ran could not understand what Avalon was thinking. He assumed that they might have sniffed out that Mr. Dean was watching Edis Wyatt. But whatever the reason, Ran could not help now, because in Mr. Dean's absence, he is considered to be the representative of the village. If he acts irrationally and violates the agreement with Avalon, it will give them a chance to turn a blind eye to everything that happened in the past and seize the village. The only thing he could do now was to put everything on the shoulders of that girl. Kina said that it all looked ridiculous and asked the girl with the bow her name, which made the guard incredibly angry. She wished Kina Lilith dead and started taking aim. However, at that moment, the voice of a little girl ordered them to stop. Kylie couldn't understand where the little girl came from, and her partner told her to stop. He did this so that she could look around. This is because they were already surrounded by townspeople on all sides. The guard asked what was wrong with them and asked them to name the organization they belonged to. People said that they did not belong to any organization, but if the guards were so interested, they were players, candidates, and friends of Edis Wyatt. Pastis said that the guy lying on the floor had recently helped them all, so the guard should have understood what he was getting at. He cheerfully added that they could not just pass by. Kina noticed that this child was able to collect all the candidates from Group C. She admitted that she did a great job considering the situation. Her father warned Kina to be careful because something was coming. And then she saw a glowing red explosion in front of her. Everyone noticed what had just come out of that hole. The players realized that the guild guards would not give up so easily. Pastis ordered his partners not to relax and to be on the alert. In the palms of two guards' hands appeared bundles of letters. The players were impressed by this method of letter delivery as it looked very cool. Kylie announced that they had received an order from the captain. The captain ordered us to temporarily stop following the original plan. Namely, not to touch anyone who claims to have a smartphone. Asen told Kyla that it was time to stitch up her legs. He emphasized that it was the captain's order, and the girl had no choice but to obey it. The players began to mock them for leaving so easily. Absent advised them not to jump to conclusions and said that they would meet very soon. Finally, he told Group C that they would meet at the candidates' exam. 1 week has passed since the massive fire. Dean finally returned to the village where he was met with an unpleasant sight. The king was angry that someone dared to do this to his village. All the residents of the village of Vakad began to work diligently to restore everything as soon as possible after the attack by an unknown organization. Kaylee and Eddie also began to recover quickly. The guy could not even imagine that he would start recovering so quickly because he thought he was going to die. He assumed it was Kaylee who was affecting him in some way. It seemed to Eddie that the girl was still depressed about her blackout a week ago. But Eddie could understand her. If the girl had been with her former master, this would not have happened. Kaylee asked the boy to think quietly. The guy did not expect that Kaylee could also hear his thoughts, and she started beating him, while Pastis came to their room with fruit. The girl asked if his name was Pastis. She had heard that he had brought the whole group to help them. The guy said not to worry about it, because Eddie had helped them all pass the exam, and now they were friends. Candidates should help each other. In the middle of the conversation, Eddie remembered how the criminal introduced himself as Mezcal. He was also a candidate for the player and almost killed him. It was interesting that there were too many suspicious facts in this case, the main one being that all the thieves who were caught seemed to have teleported away with only their clothes left. And apart from the leader of the organization, they knew nothing about its members. Eddie continued to think about this situation. Then Pastis hugged Eddie and Kaylee and said that the most important thing now was to get well soon. It seemed that they were the only ones who put their lives on the line outside the tower. Kaylee was annoyed that this boy was acting as if they were close, and he was surprised by her words because she was saying this after all the tangerines he had brought. The tower was the place where Nagi was, and if you think about it, Eddie still doesn't know anything that could be connected to her. Eddie asked Pastis if there are often fights in the tower because according to him, putting your life on the line in the tower is quite common. After this question, The guy assumed that Eddie knew nothing about the tower. Eddie thought that if this was the topic of conversation, he would be glad if Pastis could tell him about the tower. But the guy said he had no desire to do so. He reminded X Wyatt that they are all candidates, and in everything that concerns the players, they are rivals with him. That's why Pastis didn't want to tell him about the tower. He told him not to be offended because that's life. However, before he left the room, the door slammed into his face. The other players of Group C came to the room to wish Callie and Eddie a speedy discharge. Eddie tried to stop them, warning them that it was too crowded. Callie ordered them all out, even though the boy was a patient himself. Pastis told X Wyatt that they had another visitor. The guy was unhappy that people just decided to ruin this place, and with them, you can't even dream of any peace. But Mr. Ron was not satisfied with the boy's reaction. Eddie did not expect to see him here and realized that they were screwed. The events are moved back 3 hours to the inner wall of the village of Vukod. There, on the training ground, Ran practiced his ability. He blamed himself for not being able to do anything at the most critical moment. That he could not do anything even after he confidently declared that he could do everything. Now the man felt very miserable. Sky Tower Terrarium players, he just hated all these words. Just as beautiful flowers attract insects, these words attract the attention of many people. And those who come to the tower to fulfill their dreams are no different from the garbage that constantly takes something from others. They, the guards, just hate such people. But Ran was eventually saved by some of these people. He knelt down in front of Eddie, and the guy didn't realize what he was doing. Ran told the players that if it weren't for them, their village would have turned to ashes. He knew it might sound stupid, but Ran expressed his sincere gratitude to them as a custodian and as a player. Kina apologized for being late, explaining that she couldn't find a flower shop nearby. She was extremely frightened by the atmosphere in the room. Eddie had told Ran that he could not understand him, but now the man could not understand the boy even more. All he had to do was accept the guy and all the other players. He believed that this was the only way he could repay him. Ran came to Dean and started apologizing for being late. The guy said that everything was fine and he was just going to check his arm. But he also added that he seems to have overdone it a bit. Eddie was surprised that his smartphone was returned to him. He thought it had been stolen. Lilith said that the smartphone was found in the sewer, but they could not find any evidence of fingerprints. The girl thought that this was her way of repaying the guy for the exam, so she was about to leave. Kaylee didn't understand what this strange thing was, because after everyone tried to slit each other's throats for it, it just ended up in the sewer. Just as Eddie assumed, there is someone else in this world from his reality. When he turned on his smartphone, he was stunned. The guy did not understand what was happening because it was simply impossible. Eddie was scared because he received a call from an unknown number. With horror on his face, he picked up the phone anyway. The other person was pleased to find out that the phone had been transferred. He emphasized that such things should not be thrown around and asked Eddie if he agreed. The guy called X Wyatt by name and asked if he was okay. Eddie recognized the voice immediately. He didn't understand how this was possible. The interlocutor asked the boy if he thought he was the only one who was so special. It was Ellis Kelly, who belonged to the Avalon Guild, and he asked Eddie if he wanted to see him after such a long period of time. The smartphone was the only thing that connected Eddie to the world he came from. While using it, he had a fleeting sense of hope that a smartphone could connect him to a person in reality. However, he would never have thought that this person would be Ellis Kelly. And so they finally met for the first time after a long period of time. Ellis said it was unexpected that Eddie came alone. The guy asked Ellis how he came to be here and why. The young man responded with a counter-question, asking if Eddie thought he was the only one who had met God. He added that what is more important now is that they are facing a more urgent problem. Ellis suspected that he had been pretending to be him all along, using his phone. But Eddie immediately denied that it was a misunderstanding. Ellis asked the boy if he should clean up the mess in the world after him. These words sounded like a kind of reproach to Eddie. He bowed his head pitifully and began to apologize to Ellis. The guy eerily replied to Eddie that he was exactly the same as before. He came closer to him and said it was a pitiful sight. Ellis said it didn't matter if Eddie was trying to pretend to be him or not. He would look the other way, and it wasn't the first time the guy had tried to do something like that. Instead, he asked the boy not to come to the exam for the players. However, Eddie replied emphatically that he could not do that. This answer unpleasantly surprised Ellis Kelly. Eddie said he would definitely climb the tower. He clutched his phone and wanted to add something. The guy threw him over the bridge and into the water. Eddie firmly stated that he never tried to parody the guy. Ellis told his interlocutor to wake up and asked him if he didn't think he was the main character in the story. Eddie replied that it didn't matter to him. He was going to climb the tower and that was his decision. Holding the phone, Ellis recognized that Eddie had indeed changed. He said that in that case he would personally make every effort to prevent Eddie from climbing the tower. The boy was surprised by this red glow, which could mean that Ellis had also received the power of God. However, after this statement, Ron appeared and tied Ellis Kelly's hands. The man noticed that he had arrived at the scene just in time. He told Eddie to go back to the castle because Kaylee was worried about him. Ellis recognized Ron in front of him. He was a character he liked. Ron said that using the skills against a civilian was against the rules, and he would act according to procedure. Ellis tore his cloth and said that the man would not be able to beat him, and added that it would be better to call a second runner to ensure compliance with the rules. Ran didn't expect his opponent to be able to tear the fabric he used with his skill. He attacked the guy again, demanding that he stop his absurd jokes. But Ellis had no trouble dodging his attacks. Ran asked the Avalon Guild member what he was trying to pull this time. Ellis emphasized that he had already said that Rana was not able to defeat him. Ran continued to attack the guy, advising him not to lose his temper. Ellis already knew about his skills with fabric manipulation, but seeing it live was very exciting. The guy said that in any case, it would be completely useless if the opponent came closer. Ran got angry and told the boy not to judge him by himself. Ellis recognized that compressing the fabric and thus increasing its speed was a good solution. He wanted to say that such an attack was not enough to overcome him, but Ran suddenly appeared behind him. So Ellis still had to resist his attacks. Thanks to this technique, Ran was able to throw his opponent far back. Eddie wanted to ask the man how he knew where he was, but Ran asked him to wait. He emphasized that they had not finished the battle with the enemy. Ellis said to be able to manipulate such a simple skill like tissue control to such an extent is truly impressive. The guy touched his phone and asked Ran if this was exactly how he did it. Eddie and Ran were incredibly shocked that Ellis was able to replicate the man's skill. The guy pointed his hand at him and asked how he wanted to be beaten. But Dean suddenly appeared. He had heard rumors that this guy was a new recruit. Ellis noticed that Dean's second runner was the same as the one in the webtoon. As Dean watched the guy blatantly ignore his question, he realized that he was absolutely right. After that, Dean saw 4 bundles of cloth coming at him. Dean was right in front of Ellis, but he didn't notice his presence, wondering how long he had been sitting there. Dean's class is Mechanical Swordsman. The guy should be careful with his mechanical arm and keep his distance. But suddenly, Ellis found one right next to him. The guy wasted no time and immediately wrapped it in a cloth. Dean asked his opponent if he had gotten permission from Ran before using this skill. Ellis replied that he didn't mess up the skill by using it. It was very close, but Dean could still react to his attacks. Dean cheerfully said that the guy definitely lacked manners. Ellis knew that Dean was the second ranker, and among all the existing players, he was the closest to the first, to Nagi. After that, the guy immediately approached Ellis and said that they would start his correction by beating him. Dean had no trouble tearing through the fabric and told Ellis to stand up. He then threw it far back with a single finger. Dean sternly told him to straighten up and that this was just the beginning. Ellis told his opponent that he didn't have to tell him that, because he was already up. Ran turned to Mr. Dean and asked him not to go too far. Now the guy was going to pick up where they left off. Ellis assumed from Dean's appearance that he was serious and asked how about the possibility that the village could be destroyed. The guy had no plan to stop this battle, so this time he wasn't going to let Dean get away with it. However, he just stood there numb, feeling the terrifying aura coming from his opponent. Dean angrily said that Ellis must have gone mad. He did not like the boy talking about the village in his presence. Before Dean could do anything, he was surrounded by people from the Avalon Guild. He told them that he was in a bad mood and that they should not think that he would fall for their tricks as usual. Absent said that the leader of their team had insulted Dean. He apologized and asked him to leave the place in peace. Ellis told them not to decide for him because he was not going to run away. However, when he said that it was an order from the vice captain, his expression changed dramatically. Absent added that, as Dean could see, their leader was not yet familiar with the Charter's non-aggression pact between Avalon and the Village of Entrance. Ran asked unhappily if they were suggesting that they turn a blind eye to the incident. Absent replied that according to the Charter, they would pay any price, whatever it was. That's what the vice captain said. Dean sighed and told them to get out of here, adding that it looked like Addis Wyatt had some problematic friends. Ellis told the guy in his wake that he had terrible taste in people. He added that he would regret his decision to pick up this lowlife. After that, Avalon members and residents of the village of Bicod went their separate ways. Dean passed Eddie Wyatt without saying a word to him. Rand noticed that the boy took the situation to heart. When night fell, Eddie and Kaylee were sleeping in their beds. Eddie couldn't sleep, so he got out of bed. Kaylee was also awake and heard her neighbor get up. At this time, Ron was working with fabrics in his studio. He heard a knock at the door and went out to see who was there. Eddie came to see him. He looked completely depressed and looked down. They went outside and Rand told Eddie that he was already strong and he shouldn't worry. But the guy replied that the only one who was strong was Kaylee, not him. Eddie asked Rand for help until he could hit the man at least once. Rand agreed to help the guy and told him to attack. Eddie immediately attacked his opponent, but the latter easily dodged his attack. Rand then kicked Eddie in the stomach. The guy experienced incredibly severe pain, but he was not going to give up so easily. He calmed down and prepared to attack Rand again. The morning sun illuminated the house where Dean and his friends lived. It was already starting to dawn, and Rand decided that that was enough for today. He told the boy that he understood his anger, and that's why he agreed to the request. He also emphasized that in any case, the destruction of his body, as it is now without a clear plan, will not improve the guy's situation. Just as Eddie thought, he was incredibly weak. He felt like a real nobody without Kaylee. The boy asked Sir Ron whether he should just let go of his desire to become a gambler or give up. The man sternly asked Eddie Wyatt if he had come to complain to him. With tears in his eyes, Eddie replied that he really wanted to become stronger. Then he heard a woman's voice tell him to shut up. It was the Excalibur approaching their training site. The guy did not expect the girl to come here. He asked Callie how she knew he was here, but then I saw small tears in Kaylee's eyes. The girl pitifully said that the real loser was not him, but her, but Eddie did not understand what she was saying. Excalibur thought she was right because Eddie had gone to fight without her. Callie thought it was because she was weak and stupid. If she could have done it then, she wouldn't have broken her arm like an idiot. Eddie tried to explain that he only did it because he didn't want to drag his girlfriend into it. But she reminded him of how he said they would climb the tower together and said he was lying to her. The guy said it was not like that, and he did not think she was useless and weak, so he asked her not to cry anymore. Ran watched Eddie try to prove to Kaylee that she was crying, but he was not pleased to see the sight. Excalibur started hitting the guy because she didn't want to admit that she was crying. Ran was extremely amused by watching these two children. He turned to them and said he would work with them both. Ran happily announced that to help them become stronger, he would take care of them. Eddie was incredibly happy to hear this, but Kaylee didn't understand what was happening. When the sun had already emerged from the mountains, the children sincerely thanked Ran for his help. In a local bar, members of Group C were talking about a recent rumor about a smartphone. It was said that this is a really good item, and the person who owns it, a guy from Avalon, one of the players asked if Eddie Wyatt doesn't use a smartphone. One girl heard that Avalon had sent people to Eddie to ask why he was going around throwing their names around. In other words, Eddie brought a bad name to them, and Shannon said that it was just his theory anyway. After Keen's words, Lilith looked at Shannon in surprise. The guy noticed that they made eye contact and thought she was interested in him, so he decided not to miss his chance. Shannon continued, saying that it was quite funny that arriving exclusively on his items, playing the confidence game. It was all a lie, and in reality he was nothing but a weakling. The guy added that Eddie might not even come to the test, and if he were in his place, he would be too depressed to do so. Keena Lilith elegantly got up from the table and announced that she would go first. She said that she didn't have time to sit here and participate in this empty talk, so she was going to leave. Shannon was disappointed to see Miss Lilith's reaction. The other participants said they had to go as well, and before leaving they thanked Shannon for the treats. Pastas followed Keena Lilith looking back. He suddenly asked the woman if she liked Eddie Wyatt. However, after she grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, he immediately began to say that it was a joke. He looked at his newly stretched t-shirt with regret. Lilith said that she hates it when people tell lies about others without even knowing the whole situation, even though that's all it takes. She added that they don't have much time to just sit here and talk. That's because they will start the approximate test in less than 10 days. Ran began by saying that children need to reinforce their resolve. He announced that from that day they would begin special training. To do this, they went almost to the very top of the terrarium's tower. It was incredibly tall, and it was the first time they had seen the tower so close. Ran said that of all the places in the village of Bakota, this is the place closest to the tower. Eddie asked if their training would take place here, and Ran replied that they would understand it faster if they experienced it for themselves. Using his cloth, he drew a line in front of the children. He said that their first task was to try to cross this line. Kaylee was surprised that all they had to do was cross the line. Eddie told his partner to wait so they could do it together, but she had already put her foot down. However, suddenly an electric current pierced the girl's entire body. After that, she fell to the ground helplessly. Ron told Eddie Wyatt that he was next and ordered him to cross the line. The guy was still surprised after what happened with Excalibur, but he decided that he needed to put aside his doubts and ran through the line. The guy felt very strange sensations piercing his body. It was just like the time Nagi defeated Eddie. After a while, Eddie finally regained consciousness. The boy tried to tell Saran his assumption about this place. The man beat him to it, saying that the area where the boy ended up when he crossed the barrier is in a small number of inner worlds. He said that this is the domain of the Sky Tower Terrarium. This zone of influence of the tower is not even inside it. The players themselves called this place the domain. The reason Ran let these two into the tower domain was not just to make them feel the pressure of the tower domain to pass the preliminary test. The main reason was to define the characteristics of the Sky Tower Terrarium. Ran told the children that there was no concept of death in the tower. Instead, if your body reaches its limit, you will need to pay a price. Ran thought about how this could be explained and said that it was actually very difficult. He said the price was the loss of a small number of his memories. Eddie and Kaylee were extremely surprised to hear this answer. They thought there would be a more serious problem than just the loss of memories. Ron said that people who hear about it for the first time almost always say yes. They think that memory loss is a small price to pay to not die. He was going to give them one example, because children will understand everything faster if they experience it for themselves. Eddie and Kaylee looked at what was down there and asked what it was. Sir Ron replied that this was the Forest of Losers, a place for people who ignored the definition of the rules. Ran added that, moreover, they are also their opponents during training. Then the man threw the children down and told them to try to survive. He added that he had marked certain places with his cloth. The condition for passing was to find and return the fabric as soon as possible. All this time, Ran has been guiding Eddie and Kaylee in their training. He has to make sure they have developed and improved in the last 10 days. The man believed that if they could not cope with this, then they should give up. After all those people are dropouts from those who wanted to become players. People looked like zombies and immediately went to the children. Eddie ordered Kaylee to get up and asked her if she didn't see that they were going to be torn to pieces, and she said that she was feeling a little sick after the fall. He told her to recover quickly and assured her that if the girl turned into a sword, he would handle them. Eddie was going to end it with one attack because they don't have time to fight. They had better find the piece of cloth that Sir Ran had hidden in order to pass this training. Unfortunately, however, Eddie's sword again looked like a flawed piece of work. Ran was surprised that they failed so quickly and thought it was probably normal, even though he had given them some hints from the beginning. If they had only cooperated and had a little luck, they would have made it. But the Forest of the Losers does not forgive mistakes. If children still don't unleash their potential, they won't have a chance to win. Eldie was incredibly annoyed that everything was going terribly right now. The girl was quietly sleeping at the time. Kali finally woke up after falling asleep for just a moment. She began to apologize and was determined to beat the crap out of her opponents. But after that, Kaylee couldn't remember what she had just done. The girl only remembered that she was Excalibur. The ego was the sword of God. She began to remember what her role was. And I came to the conclusion that she should just sit here. Who knew that the girl would mutter to herself like that? At least there is no Arthur here. Excalibur was sitting alone among a pile of different artifacts. She asked God when he would finally listen to her, because she missed him. Excalibur pitifully assumed that he had forgotten about her. However, she perked up and realized that now was not the time to give up. She decided that when she met God again, she would ask him for one favor. Excalibur told God Arthur that she would always be waiting for him. She added that it was okay if he was a little late. She was already used to it, and in return, next time she wanted to ask for a name. The girl didn't like the fact that she had a weapon name like Excalibur. She wanted to have her own name, one that no one would forget. The girl finally came to when someone called her Kaylee. Excalibur was surprised that she fainted. Eddie begged Kaylee to wake up at last. Then he heard that she had woken up and asked the girl if it was not difficult to turn into the shape of a sword again. Eddie emphasized that he did not want to give up, even if it was the end. He was sure they could do it if they worked together. Kali listened to his words and transformed back into the shape of a sword. The girl asked him how she was and whether she was the only thing he had. After a favorable response, Kaylee suggested that we deal with them in one fell swoop. Eddie liked her suggestion and sent a powerful punch at his opponents. This blow caused a big dust storm around. Kaylee told the boy to hold on because they had to run away as fast as possible before more enemies came. Eddie felt incredibly nauseous. He realized that he would never get used to it. He felt like he had been on a roller coaster for 3 hours. However, he noticed changes in Kaylee's appearance. He saw that her hair had grown much longer. Dean told Ran that it was pretty cool. The ego sword was getting stronger with its master. He did not think he would ever witness such a spectacle. The sound could be heard as far away as here. Now Dean was ready to ask Ran one question. He could not understand why the man left his 2 children to die in this damned forest. Addis Wyatt and Kaylee's group entered the Forest of the Losers. They set up a small camp, and 56 hours have passed since they entered. While Eddie was fighting here, he learned one interesting thing. You can never feel hungry here. Instead of eating, you just need to sleep, because after what happened during the day, you are simply unable to move a finger and fall asleep without a care in the world. You can also heal a little during sleep, and this feature is most likely used on these losers because they hide after nightfall. It was also the best time to search for fabric while the losers were sleeping. But Eddie didn't want to wake Kali up while she was sleeping so sweetly. So the guy thought it was time for him to go to bed. That night, Eddie Wyatt had an unusual dream. He dreamed of Excalibur, and this dream was a little more special than usual. In the morning, Eddie felt incredibly tired. Kaylee noticed this and told the boy that he looked like he was about to kick off his hooves. Eddie wanted to explain that it was because of his dream last night, but he told the girl to forget it. And Kaylee got annoyed and asked him if he had accidentally moved his head in the past 3 days. The guy didn't want to directly state that he dreamed about Kaylee. He meant that it was a shame to tell a girl. After a short rest, he and Kaylee decided what they would do when the losers appeared. As it turned out that their goals did not coincide. They came to a common decision that when they use a sword attack, they would choose only one target. These were the conditions for using the ability, and Eddie began to understand his ability better. After Eddie lost consciousness, he finally woke up. Kaylee noticed that, as expected, about 3 hours had passed since the boy had lost consciousness, which was longer than Eddie had anticipated. He asked her how she measured it without a watch, and Kali replied that when she was in the divine world and had nothing to do, she wasted time counting it. Just as Eddie thought, that dream was a girl's memory. Kaylee asked what he meant, and Eddie told her to forget about it and advised her to start going. The guy said that the fact that he learned how long he could use his ability was something that would allow them to improve their plans in the future. Eddie would like to know more, like whether it can adjust the power of the attack. As soon as he came to this forest, he realized something. He knows nothing not only about his ability, but also about Kali. Excalibur mockingly asked Eddie why he was so excited. The girl said it was just her opinion, but it seems to her that Ran sent them here expecting Eddie to become like that. Then she said they should just try and ask where they were going, and Eddie said he wanted to check out the center of the forest. He assumed that this was the place where Sir Ran had hidden the cloth, so he climbed a tree and saw a large open area. Kaylee agreed to go. It seemed to her that it would be easier than she thought. She said that everything was going according to plan, but then an unknown monster appeared behind the girl. A piece of yellow cloth was tied around the monster's arm. Eddie was horrified to realize that this was the very fabric they needed. He wanted to warn Kali about the danger, but it was too late. After that, the monster came up to Eddie and took him by the head. And it was at this point that their trial ended. The first thing Eddie did upon his return was to see Sir Ran. The man said that the boy had lasted longer than he expected. By the guy's reaction, he realized that they were familiar with that monster. Eddie was incredibly angry that this was Ran's plan from the very beginning. He asked the man how dare he tie the cloth on the monster. He asked the man if he had any idea what had happened to Kaylee. Ran sternly asked the boy if he was going to surrender right now. These words made Eddie angry and he told Kaylee to leave. However, Ran interrupted his intentions, telling him to calm down and tell him what he was going to do when he got there. The guy was furious at the suggestion that he would just run away again. Eddie asked exhaustedly what he could do. But the creature was incredibly fast and too strong, and Eddie couldn't do anything. Ran suggested that Eddie thought the creature was unstoppable. Kaylee asked them to stop the bullying, because they were trying their best to learn how to use their abilities properly, especially Eddie. Ran asked sternly if they thought that was all they needed to know. But Excalibur did not understand what he was talking about. Eddie told Kaylee to leave, but she hadn't had time to say anything yet. Ran said that if they ran away again, he would be happy to wait for them here. Kaylee asked Eddie to wait, saying that she was going with him. At that time, he wondered if he had become so arrogant. Even so, it would be surprising if his idea works. He wasn't sure if his idea was a good one, but he decided that confidence was the key to success. So Ran prepared this training in the hope that they would become stronger. This means that there is a way to pass it anyway. Looking at the giant monster, Kaylee asked Eddie what he was going to do. The guy started to approach the monster, and the girl thought that Eddie had gone crazy. The next moment, the giant monster rushed straight to the boy. And all Eddie did was bow, say his name, and say it was nice to meet you. Neither Excalibur nor the monster expected this from the boy. The creature said that it did not even think that anyone would ever do this and began to laugh out loud. She asked if she could find out the reason why Eddie had spoken to her. The guy replied that he thought he was someone they could talk to. Otherwise, Sir Ran's cloth would not have been so carefully tied to the monster. After these words, the hand on which the cloth was hanging began to dissolve. The huge monster disappeared, and a woman came out of it instead. Eddie was incredibly surprised that the creature he spoke to was a woman. She greeted the boy and handed him the cloth. Eddie was surprised that she was giving it away so easily, and the woman replied that she was just doing what Ran had asked her to do. He understood that this meant he had passed the training, but he felt that something was wrong with it. Kaylee approached Eddie. It was clear that she was incredibly angry, and the guy started apologizing for not warning him. If you think about it, it wasn't really that easy, but the guy decided that he needed to focus on the benefits. The woman said that the tissue entrusted to her should also reach Sir Ran, and unexpectedly for everyone, she said it was time to do it. She grabbed Eddie Wyatt by the throat and tore the cloth in his hands. The creature wanted to know how many of its precious children Eddie had killed before he came here. The cloth in Sir Ran's hands also tore into pieces. He realized that the real test had just begun. The story cuts to Dean and Ran talking about their children. Dean asked Ran why he had used Eddie and Kaylee as bait for this crazy woman. The man replied that he did it only for the purpose of training them. Dean was surprised to hear him say that. Ran explained that the children said they wanted to become stronger, so he fulfilled their request. Dean let the man go and asked if he had told them about it. After all, he must understand perfectly well that those losers were also once people, and they all went into the forest for one thing. Although there are those who consider the forest a sacred place, in the end it is simply a place cursed by the tower. Dean wanted to say what would happen if they lost, but Ran replied that the very thought of losing was simply unacceptable. With confidence in his face, he said that he believed in children. He said that even if they failed, he would die with them. These words caused a mixed reaction on Dean's face. He recalled that it had been a long time since he had quarreled with Ran and spoken to him in this manner. He resigned himself and told the man to do what he thought was right. Sir Ran looked down and thanked him dryly. Finally, Dean told Ran not to say that he would die with them. He emphasized that this is not a responsibility he should take on himself. But he also added that Ran should believe in the children to the very end. The story moves back to Eddie's fight with the forest monster. The woman demanded that he answer the question of how many people he had already killed. She emphasized that of course he doesn't know this, because a murderer doesn't count how many people he has killed. Eddie shouted that they attacked them first and he didn't want to kill them. The woman said that it was not good to lie, because Eddie was the one who first attacked them. Kaylee started running to the woman and told her she was wrong. The forest creature threatened that if the girl made one more move, the boy would die. With a crazy look on her face, she asked the children if they wanted to climb the tower too. She has already met a lot of people with the same goal, and they all just became part of this forest. The forest creature told them to just give up, otherwise it would not allow them to climb the tower. Then the woman noticed how Eddie barely pronounced Kaylee's name. He turned to the girl and said that this crazy woman was their target. He wanted Kaylee to transform into a sword, but at that moment the forest creature cut off one of his fingers. The guy's body was immediately pierced by incredibly strong pain. The woman said that she was warning the particularly gifted one last time. Let them not dare to move. She threatened that otherwise, the next thing Eddie would be left with would be a shoulder. Because of the unbearable pain, Eddie was not even able to think, and he realized that it was probably a trap from the beginning. That time, the woman deliberately killed him painlessly, hoping that he would come back here again. It was incredibly painful, and Eddie realized that it would be better if he got away from her as soon as possible. With a happy expression, the forest creature asked if it wasn't incredible. What she meant was that Eddie was not bleeding through the tower, but she was sure that he was definitely in pain from his injuries. She knew that what was taking over Eddie was fear, that he was afraid he was going to die. He is also afraid that he might lose his memory. He is afraid that he will become like one of those zombies. She told him to just give up, for him to come back and tell Ran that he was giving up and didn't want to go up the tower. However, Eddie aggressively replied that he would not give up even if he died here. A bright blue glow came from the place where they were standing. Excalibur could not understand that this was happening at all. The plot shifts to the country's first guild called Avalon. Absent from the Avalon Guild arrived on the top floor of the audience hall. He humbly greeted Vice President von Sigmund, the 8th-ranking vice president. Sigmund asked Absent if he was responsible for that newcomer and suggested that he had been through a lot. Absent was pleased that the vice president remembered him, and he assured him that they would make every effort to ensure his presence at the entrance. The vice president asked me to take care of the player test that was to take place in the coming days. He turned his attention to his smartphone and asked if this was what Absent wanted to talk to him about. The man said that they found him on their land, but judging by their investigation, this smartphone does not have that energy. Ellis came into the room and said that it was just a smartphone and that it was useless without a real owner. He asked if they were interested and said that he had a similar ability. He reported that his ability was copying. Absent told Ellis that he could not just go in and out without proper authorization. Ellis wanted to keep the terms of use of the ability a secret for now. Absent ordered the guy to stop, even though he was the head of the team. The man had no intention of tolerating his disrespect any longer. Von Sigmund told Ellis that he was quite interesting. He asked the boy if his full name was Elish Kelly. The vice president emphasized that he would look forward to his future achievements. Ellis was pleased with this reaction. He was at a fairly close distance, but still could not see the man's face. He assumed that it could be some kind of ability that blocks the guy's perception, and realized that the vice captain was more cautious than he thought. Ellis suggested that this might be for the best, not that he wanted to rush to get to know Sigmund, but instead he would like to know where Dean was now. He remembered the humiliation that he had inflicted on him, and he definitely wanted to take revenge on him. First, he decided to prove to this arrogant runner that he had made the wrong choice. Exactly 5 days later, at the players' test, Ellis intended to destroy Addis Wyatt like an ant. He believed that no one cared about what the boy had received from God. The forest creature did not understand why Eddie continued to resist. She had already asked him to surrender, but Eddie was tired of hearing this endlessly. After all, no matter what he did, no matter how hard he tried, people still hated him. He grabbed the monster by the arm, saying, "Loser, miserable guy, and failure." The woman grabbed her hand and ordered Eddie to let go. Eddie took her by the scruff of the neck and asked her if she thought that the guy was worthless compared to her. Even so, he intended to prove her very wrong. The forest creature could not understand how this guy had super regeneration. She realized it was dangerous and ducked back. Kaylee could not believe that this crazy woman had just left Eddie. It was good, of course, but she realized that something was wrong with the guy. Kaylee admitted that she had never seen anything like this before. It was hard for her to believe that Eddie also had his own unique abilities. Then the guy turned to her and said it was time to go. Excalibur realized what this meant and was in his arms the next moment. The forest creature said it was too obvious an attack. She asked him if he really thought she would just stand there and do nothing. Eddie turned to Kaylee, but she already knew what he wanted to tell her. She realized that their target was those monsters behind them. The forest creature noticed that they were not aiming at it and prepared to defend its children. The next moment, a powerful blow pierced the forest. Kaylee asked Eddie if he was okay, but he could barely stand. The girl asked to be released so that she could return to her normal form and help him. But Eddie said he couldn't do it yet. Looking at the mutilated creature in front of them, he said that this was not the end. The zombies behind them watched the forest creature that protected them from being hit. Even with his old determination, Eddie still lacked courage. He could not just leave those zombies alive. As soon as the guy thought that their lives were no different from his, he just couldn't do it. The forest creature walked up to Eddie and stood right in front of him. Eddie began to apologize to Excalibur in a sad way. He recognized that it was a loss, and he failed again. And when the guy decided that it was completely over, something touched his cheek. With the last of his strength, he looked, but could not see it. He saw a monster that somehow wanted to kill him. But that monster, that forest creature, looked incredibly upset. Lillian could not remember when this forest had been entrusted to her. And since when did admiring the moonlight become her only joy? And also, at what point did the girl have to experience loneliness? Looking at the guy from behind the trees, she asked who he was. The next day, this guy assured his friends that the person he met was still here. She lived in the center of the forest and was also a bit crazy. He claimed it was true, that he had even seen her yesterday and told his friends to just shut up and follow him. Because of the large number of trees, the blonde man almost forgot where he was going. Then he finally saw Lillian and told his friends that they had found her. The boy called the woman a teacher, but she told him not to call her that. The blonde man said that he had brought friends with him. Lillian asked the young people why they were standing there like that and invited them to come over and say hello, because they said they wanted to become players. Then they bowed before the teacher and said their names. Lillian never intended to train anyone. She also thought she had no interest or talent for teaching. Unlike them, women had the power from the very beginning. But Lillian began to think that this was normal because she missed socializing and things like that. She loved the moments when the students cheered each other on, thus echoing throughout the forest. These moments made the girl feel happy. The students often thanked Lillian for everything she did for them. One day they told me that they had to go and prepare for the players' test tomorrow. They were confident that they would pass it and thanked the teacher for teaching them diligently. One of the students invited Lillian to go with them to the tower. He was sure that she would easily enter the top 100 runners. The woman replied that she would like to go with them, but she could not leave this forest. They knew how much the teacher hated to leave the forest and simply did not want to leave her. Lillian was approached by the student who had brought everyone else here. He assured them that everything would be fine, and that even when they got out of the tower, they would return to it. So they asked Lillian to just wait for them. After these words, the woman kissed the blonde man on the forehead. Tears welled up in her eyes at how sweet they could be. Lillian told them to take care of themselves and come back safe and sound. That evening she said goodbye to her dear students. And so Lillian was left alone in this forest again. And it was then that she began to wait for their return. The woman wondered how far they had already gotten and hoped that they were not taking too many risks. She also didn't understand why they were going up the tower at all, and she would have preferred them to stay with her. Even if they did not become players while they are here, they will still be her precious children. Lillian thought it would be okay if they wanted to give up. She just hoped that they would return in one piece. One evening she heard a noise on the mountain near the forest. It was people from the Avalon Guild who brought the losers here. They took turns throwing them out of the canyon and into the forest. Lillian watched as the scum of Avalon got rid of more and more of the dead in this forest. They treated the forest as their own dump. The woman just wanted them to be safe, even if they didn't succeed, which is normal, because dreams don't just come true. She didn't mind if her students became gamblers. I did not mind as long as they remained alive. Among those who were thrown out were dear students of Lillian. The woman did not understand why it happened that way, and why she did not stop them and tell them to surrender. Lillian hoped that at least Eddie would listen to her. With tears in her eyes, she asked him why he did not want to obey her. Eddie touched her face with his fingers and began to apologize. He apologized for calling those people monsters. He was really ashamed, and after saying that, he asked her to stop crying. After that, Callie appeared and attacked Lillian. The girl threw the woman away from Eddie Wyatt. Lillian could not understand why Ran had sent them here in the first place. She said that everything would happen again. They would die and return to the forest as walking corpses, so she advised them to surrender. Callie asked what gives a woman such confidence, because at least they try harder than she does. She didn't understand why, if she was so worried about them, she wouldn't just help them. Callie said that then they would be as strong as her, and she wouldn't have to worry about them. Lillian did her best to tell Callie to shut up. She wanted them to stay away from her. This is because she did not want to get her hopes up again. Callie prepared for the worst, but felt that her opponent had stopped. Lillian couldn't understand why her children were also stopping her. The woman asked the students if they really wanted her to trust these children. Even after all they have been through, the students want to give Lillian hope. Lillian's monster's image dissipated, and she asked the children what their names were. The girl replied that her name was Kaylee, and this guy was Addis Wyatt. With tears in her eyes, she asked them to promise that no matter how much time passed, they would return here safely after fulfilling their wishes. And so Lillian returned to a state of waiting. 3 days have passed since then, and as soon as Eddie woke up, the teacher began her training, the content of which was quite simple. Lillian offered to play catch-up for 3 days, and if she caught them, she would kill them. Eddie could say with certainty that these 3 days were the most extreme in his life. Of all the people Lillian had trained, these 2 were the only ones she had never caught. She said that of all the kids, they were the best at running away. This was all Lillian could teach them, and she praised the children for their efforts. The children were incredibly happy to finally be able to do this. Kaylee told Eddie that he had done an incredible job and that she would finally be able to sleep in a soft bed. The girl was incredibly proud of him and said that she would even miss that hellish Ran. Lillian asked the children to listen and said that this lesson was about running away from someone who is stronger than you. It was the most valuable lesson she could give them right now. She emphasized that it is important to understand this because there are incredibly strong players in the tower and you need not only to win, but also to stay alive. This required improving their abilities, but the children had a bad feeling about it, and Eddie asked the teacher if she was going to do it again. With a yellow cloth in her hands, she replied that they would have to ask the person themselves. She threw the cloth and a bright red light came from that place. From there, Ran began to appear. He said that he heard the children saying some interesting things about him and also saying some interesting things about hell. The man promised that from that moment on, in the remaining 4 days, he would show them what real hell was like. The day came when the players' test was to take place. Shannon asked his comrades if everyone had eaten and rested well and told them not to be nervous, because they had him. He emphasized that if they were just themselves, they would succeed, but the other players did not realize that he was doing it. Lilith looked around and found that most of the players were not much different from the first test. She didn't like Shannon's behavior and had no idea what was going to happen next. Pastis approached Lilith and asked who she was looking at so closely, hinting that it might be Eddie. After these bold words, he immediately received a fist in the face. Kina Lilith warned the guy that she couldn't stand such jokes, and he apologized, saying that he really liked her reaction. The guards announced that the player test would begin soon and told the candidates to get ready. Pastis couldn't find Addis Wyatt and asked Lilith what they should do, and she said that sooner or later he would come here. Then she went forward and said she would go first, and Pastis asked her to wait for him. However, a giant man stood right at the entrance, preventing me from going further. Lilith calmly asked him to leave, emphasizing that they had been told to prepare for the test. With a serious tone, the man said that this place was not for women and ordered her to leave. Lilith responded to this impudence by giving him 5 seconds to move away. After these words, the stranger began to laugh incredibly loudly. He thought it was funny that despite the fact that Kina was here by pure chance, she had no chutzpah. Other players were worried about whether the girl would be okay, and they thought it was worth helping her. Pastis said he had heard of this man with long black hair, who was the only candidate from Group B. This man was the only survivor and was nicknamed Bloody Mary. Pastis emphasized that everyone should stay in their positions, because no one was watching them now, and they could not know what he would do. After all, if they intervene, they will create a stir, and that is most likely what he is trying to achieve. The man saw that Kina did not move at all, and realized that she could not be provoked so easily, and he realized that not everyone in Group C was a simpleton. But even so, he did not deny his intention to thin out their ranks. The giant believed that it was Lilith's fault that she had been caught, and he attacked her, saying that he would correct their behavior. Seeing that the man was about to attack, Shannon decided to do it first. He aggressively asked the man who was trashing the place now. Shannon said either the man would take back his words or he would have to pay for it. Lilith was annoyed that the guy had fallen for such an obvious provocation. Now no one will blame the giant for being the first to start a fight. After these words, the enemy immediately grabbed the guy's leg. He stated that if the guy attacked him first, then all his further actions would be regarded as self-defense. After that, with an incredibly strong punch, he launched the guy into the ground. After that, the giant asked Lilith what she would do after 5 seconds had passed. The girl replied that she had no other choice now. She called him an overgrown mosquito and said she would have to play with him. But Bloody Mary from the vampire class was counting on that. Now the players understood why this man was behaving so defiantly, because the pressure from him was incredible. Pastis told all the players to be ready to fight. A huge sword appeared in Bloody Mary's hands. But at that moment, the man's body was humiliated by a strange sensation. A light blue lightning bolt appeared in the place where he was standing. The other players could not understand what had just happened. Pastis realized that it hadn't been lightning that had just been in front of them, and that someone had just defeated a fierce monster with a single blow. Lilith realized that it was none other than Addis Wyatt. Eddie asked the teacher in surprise what she had given him. Lillian happily replied that it was his graduation present and said that he had done a great job. She kept the cloth for a long time and said that when the time came, Eddie would understand, but the boy could not accept such a gift. Kaylee was unhappy that all the gifts always went to the boyfriend, and Eddie asked her if she wanted to try on the cloak. Lillian hugged Kali and told her not to be sad that she was left without a gift, adding that there is a saying, "Everything has its time." The woman was incredibly happy that in these few days Eddie had become so strong that she could feel it, even just standing next to him. Then she let Kaylee go and said that it was time for them to say goodbye. Lillian called Eddie over to her, saying she wanted to give him another gift. The guy was surprised to hear about the gift and that there would be something else. Lillian pulled Eddie close and kissed him on the forehead. Excalibur was surprised that this was her parting gift. After that, Lillian said that now would be her parting gift and threw Eddie into the air. She threw him toward the test stadium and told him to be careful. Finally, she expressed hope that they would meet soon and also said not to forget about Kaylee. And it was at that moment that the guy ran into Bloody Mary. Momo, the examiner, was watching, and she thought it was just a warm-up for the test, but the participants were quite enthusiastic. I asked the other judges what they thought about it. Eddie was thrown from such a long distance, but he was not harmed by the collision and thought it was because of the cloak. He also noticed that the floor was strange, but it turned out that he was standing on a man's back, and the guy was immediately frightened when he saw it. Eddie began to apologize, saying that he didn't mean to and asking the person how they were feeling. However, Bloody Mary did not answer. The guy was afraid that he had killed him. Then he heard a woman's voice call his name. It was Kifna Lilith, and she was in a hurry to warn him about something. Namely, that the crazy person behind the boy is still alive. The Bloody Mary swung and hit the guy, causing enormous pressure around him. Lilith was shocked by the enormous pressure of the blow. She doubted that such an attack could be dodged. But to her surprise, Eddie was standing there unharmed. But the giant felt that he could not move. In an aggressive voice, the man asked Eddie who he was. He looked back at the participants and saw Pastis holding the wounded Shannon. The stealer made him angry. He clenched his palm, destroying Bloody Mary's weapon, and asked the man what he was doing. This audacity made Bloody Mary very angry, and he took a swing at Eddie. The man threatened to chop the boy into pieces with his weapon. After the monster's statement, Eddie called Kaylee to help him. And the next moment, Bloody Mary was already lying defeated under his feet. The guy furiously asked why the man thought he could attack him. He added that if he didn't kill him, he would still be under his feet. Lilith was extremely surprised by these words. She couldn't believe that this was definitely Eddie Wyatt. She could not imagine what kind of horror the boy had gone through in the past few days. The next moment, Eddie was thrown aside to the other players. He fell to the ground, but then tried to get up with all his might. The guy was embarrassed to say that the clothes were a little long on him. The participants assumed that the monster had exploded while Eddie was standing on it, and it looked quite painful. Kaylee was incredibly angry with the guy, calling him a stupid piece of human. She accused him that if he was going to get down, he shouldn't have attacked. In addition, Kaylee was annoyed that he called her out of nowhere in the middle of a battle and scared the hell out of her. Lilith looked at their quarrel and said shyly that Eddie was so funny and hadn't changed a bit. Pastis was incredibly surprised by this reaction from the girl. He asked his colleague if he had ever seen or imagined that Lilith could laugh like that. The girl came up to Kaylee and Eddie and asked how long they would stand there. She asked the children if they knew that the exam would start soon. Kana Lilith looked back at them and said she would go first. The children were surprised, but told her to wait for them. When the players got closer, the gate in front of them began to open. Everyone was very excited because the player test had finally started. The light from Eddie's ability was visible even to the Avalon Guild building. The vice president saw that it didn't seem to be the ability of any of his students, so he assumed it had to be another newcomer. Another guild member asked if they should send a reconnaissance team, but Sigmund said that was not necessary. My husband said he would go there himself. He didn't want to miss such a show. And he added that a lot of time had passed since the last time he met with the second place. After the players entered, they saw participants from other groups. They were amazed by this view, and that's how the front door was named. Eddie had the feeling that all those people were looking right at him. Among the participants, he saw a man in the form of Avalon. This meant that Ellis Kelly was also taking part in the test. Momo went out to the participants, noticing that almost everyone had already gathered. The woman announced that they would start by explaining the test itself. Ellis Kelly was a newcomer who was fully supported by the Avalon Guild. The first time people knew about him, he was an ordinary guy who defeated everyone from the Avalon battle group, sparing no one with his own hands. One of Absint's duties was to investigate everyone who served Avalon, but he was not sure about Ellis. He was unsure of anything except for one thing he could tell with certainty. He knew that Eddie Wyatt was the only person who could sway Ellis. Absint reminded Ellis that the use of excessive force is prohibited here. The guy said he already knew that. He just wanted to say hello to Eddie. He went to him and told the players who were in his way to get out of the way. They were extremely unhappy, but this made Ellis's expression incredibly frightening. The participants were frightened and immediately moved out of the boy's way. And so the guy came to the place where Eddie was standing with Kaylee. She immediately realized that it was the same guy Eddie had told her about. Eddie told her not to worry and that he would just talk to him for a while. After that, the guy stood up decisively in front of Ellis Kelly. Ellis noticed that the boy had changed a lot and even learned to look into his eyes. Eddie replied that Ellis remained the same and asked how long he would play the fool. These words immediately angered the boy, and he asked Eddie to repeat them again. They were about to start a fight, but one of the examiners stopped them immediately. Momo told them to listen carefully. She personally didn't care about their quarrels, so she asked them not to play in the test area. As long as she was watching them, she wouldn't let them. The woman threatened that otherwise they would be disqualified. Ellis looked up and saw Vice President Avalon standing there. He put on his hood and left the scene of the fight. Meanwhile, one of the examiners approached Eddie. She had seen him put her candidate down with one punch and noticed that he was a rather rough but capable guy. She approached Eddie and said that he seemed even nicer up close, but she noticed that he was not her type. The woman took his hand and said that his body was much stronger than she thought. But then she threateningly said that this was not enough for everyone from Group C to pass. Momo asked Luna to stop, saying that she was now in charge, but Luna had already said everything she wanted to say. However, Luna didn't like that everyone passed the test because of this guy. She said that a woman shouldn't be so generous with favoritism and considered it unfair. Another examiner agreed with Luna that this upset the balance of the test. Bianca noticed that Groups A and D, which take the same exam, are much smaller in number of participants, and it is unfair that the participants have the opportunity to cooperate. And she added that even if this guy is so special, it's also unfair to the test. Momo noticed that the girls had matured, but told them not to get cocky because they knew what she could say. Eddie didn't like the atmosphere, and he wasn't even sure that a fight wouldn't break out. Momo finally gave in and told Luna that she could do whatever she wanted. The girl said she would show me how to solve this problem. She looked behind Eddie and wondered if it would be worth cutting them in half. The woman turned to the members of Group C. She was sure that they were all listening to what they were talking about. Luna announced that from now on, under her leadership, the test for Group C will be a one-on-one tournament. Avalon's vice president continued to observe the situation from above. He thought that if everything was fine, it was time to go. However, one man told Captain Sigmund that they had not seen each other for a long time. It was Guildmaster Sirius, and he couldn't believe that a representative of the Avalon Guild was present at such a miserable spectacle. Sigmund thanked him for the recognition, but said that he was not the representative of Avalon. But Nagi, Sirius told him not to be modest because he was still amazed by that incredible sight. Most of all, at the moment when Nagi strangled Dean, and how that impudent man with the cheap mechanical paw tried to match her. However, Guildmaster Sirius noticed that the Vice President of Avalon was ignoring him. The man saw that another VP personality was approaching them and said he would go see it. However, he was incredibly angry when he saw who came here. The Guildmaster asked Dean how he managed to get here. He emphasized that this place is only for big shots from big guilds, and thus it is not a place for kids without a guild. Dean replied that if what Sirius had said was true, he had come to the right place. The Guildmaster asked if the boy thought he had a right to be here, and Dean noticed that in his old age, Sirius had forgotten how to move his gyrus. The man realized what this could mean and asked Dean not to say that he had a guild. Dean introduced himself as the Guildmaster of the Red Wings. He extended his hand and said that he would look forward to their fruitful cooperation. Sirius couldn't believe that this guy's guild had been approved. Then Captain Sigmund confirmed that he had approved their application and noted that it had taken a long time. Dean couldn't believe that the vice president had come out of the castle after all, and he assumed that he would want to apologize for the antics of his men. Sigmund asked to forget about it and accept the boys' guild's approval as an apology. The man did not expect this from Dean. The one who always insisted on playing alone decided to create a guild, a wise enough decision to try everything from scratch with reliable colleagues. Sigmund suggested that Dean was looking forward to someone challenging Nagi again, and Dean confirmed that he was indeed looking forward to it. They were both very interested in who would be the next person to challenge Nagi. Luna turned to the test participants and asked if they were ready. She announced that everything would be done under the leadership of Group B. Luna announced that a one-on-one tournament was starting to select players for the test. The girls started explaining the rules and said that the players had 24 hours. She also added that they are allowed to fight at full strength. She announced that the winner of the tournament would be the one who survived. Another rule was that if time ran out and both candidates were still alive, they were both eliminated. Momo was disappointed that Luna didn't have enough for more, but Bianca said she liked it because it was fair and just. Kaylee asked Eddie if it was a one-on-one fight, or if she needed to fight separately from the guy Eddie thought he should ask. Momo thought that everyone understood the rules. Then Eddie raised his hand and said he had a question. The woman expressed her disappointment because she thought that even a dumb monkey would have understood everything, and then Eddie covered his mouth. Momo hit the floor and vocalized that the test was about to begin. Kaylee couldn't understand what was wrong with these examiners because the floor was collapsing right under them. Then the whole area was suddenly enveloped in a blue glow. It was too unexpected for Eddie, and he thought that if they were going to do this, they should at least give him a warning. Then he heard a woman's voice asking where they were, and he thought it was Kaylee. He saw that they were among tall rocks of varying thickness. Kaylee did not understand what kind of place it was, because they had just been inside the building. Eddie assumed they were in the perforated terrarium. They saw a small creature in front of them, who, in the voice of an examiner, expressed hope that everyone had arrived safely. The woman clarified that the instrument in front of them was modeled after Mexico City. Momo began to tell me where they had sent them. She explained that players are now in a virtual zone that copies the real terrarium hierarchy. Players will have to adapt as quickly as possible, and the main task will be to survive. Momo emphasized that they should show their best and not forget that the guild masters were watching them. This test is a good opportunity for them to show the guilds what they can do. Finally, the examiner wished all the players good luck. The qualifying test of players began, and Kaylee and Eddie took part in the first tournament. The guy was seriously scared when he saw who his opponent would be. A famous woman was watching the battles in her room. It was Nagi's first runner, and she recognized the guy who was to participate in the first tournament. Eddie looked around the area and didn't see anything unusual. He didn't even see the borders, and wondered if this was definitely part of the terrarium. Then he turned to Kaylee and asked her if she had seen anything interesting. Callie replied that she was trying to concentrate. Then she abruptly stood up and pointed to the place in front of her, but Eddie couldn't see anything there. She told me to look straight at the horizon and pointed there with her finger. The girl saw that only there was a different color of the terrain and assumed that it was connected to something. From the landscape, the guy realized that it looked like a desert, and he asked Kaylee if she thought all the test sites were connected. After all, if that's the case, there are other candidates outside of this platform. She asked Eddie what he thought about it. The guy offered to go there when the match was over. Maybe they could unravel Ellis Kelly's abilities. Then one person came up to them and asked what they were doing here and why they were together, because it was supposed to be a one-on-one match. Shannon was in front of them, which meant that he would be their opponent. Callie asked if it was a vision, and he was definitely their opponent. But Eddie had no doubt that Shannon was their opponent. He made this conclusion when he compared the other candidates, and based on his reflections, Eddie realized that Shannon was the most undesirable candidate for them. The guy turned to Eddie and asked if this test was just a joke. He said that others risked their lives to become players and reminded him of the smartphone situation. Shannon had no idea what Eddie was trying to do. He also added that the guy was also wise enough to bring this girl with him. Shannon aggressively shouted that this test was not for dumb assholes like Eddie. Such words from his opponent made Kaylee incredibly angry. However, Eddie got in front and immediately stopped the girl. The guy told Callie to calm down, emphasizing that he was not worth it. Shannon asked if they were done there and emphasized to Eddie to stay away from Keena Lilith. However, he was surprised to hear Eddie say that he was very lucky. The guy got up and attacked his opponent. Eddie said that if his opponent was an asshole, he could easily kill him. With one punch, the guy threw Shannon far back. Kaylee was incredibly impressed with her partner's abilities. Eddie happily announced that now that they had dealt with the boy, they could go to the desert. Kaylee happily hit him on the shoulder, noticing that the boy had grown up. There were 4 groups in total, A, B, C, D. It was known that Group D had withdrawn quite quickly in the previous test, and the reason was not that they lost because of their abilities. This is because the participants did not follow the test rules. One of them started a massacre among the crowd, simply because they prevented him from thinking. Another participant killed an examiner, although he passed the test. D is a label for violators who simply cannot be controlled, and Morgan from the martial arts class was one of those scumbags. The man asked his opponent why he shouldn't just give up, and he said that he didn't want to offend such a choker. However, after saying this, he immediately received a stone in the face. Pastis asked the guy from Group D, who was flipping stones in his hand, if he had lost his way. He didn't like the nonsense that this guy had just spouted. With an incredibly fierce look, Morgan caught the stone addressed to him. The guy said he just wanted to scare Pastis, thought he could do it, but he was standing here and just wasting his nerves. He clutched the caught stone in his hand and said that it irritated him. After that, Morgan moved in the direction of his opponent. Pastis, in turn, continued to throw stones at his opponent. After that, the guy quickly hid from his opponent. Morgan didn't have high hopes for the area, but he didn't think he'd be so unlucky. Another stone was flying at him through one of the cracks. The man noticed this and said it wouldn't work with him. Pastis threw more stones and asked if he was so sure. The guy hoped that Morgan would fall into his trap. Morgan asked in frustration whether Pastis would continue to throw stones at him, because at this rate he was simply losing. After the attack, it became clear to him that the opponent could not evade them. And judging by his reaction, his attack zone is about 1 meter, so if the guy keeps his distance, his chances of winning are more than real. The only question was how he could overcome Morgan. Pastis realized that he had no choice but to use his powers, but he didn't want to show them because there were too many observers. The less people knew about his abilities, the better it was for him, and he decided that he would come up with something. Morgan noticed that the guy was turning away from the enemy during the fight, and he added that he should have followed his opponent more often. Pastis was amazed that his opponent had come so close in just 1 moment, but the guy thought that as long as he was not in his attack zone, he would be safe. However, this reaction was exactly what Morgan had hoped for. The next moment, he hit the guy right in the stomach with a powerful punch. He threw it far back, right onto one of the rocks. Morgan suggested that Pastis now thinks that it was, and that he didn't even have time to react, that the opponent was definitely further than 1 meter away, and that if Pastis comes under another attack from him, he will definitely lose. Morgan approached the boy and asked if this was not what he was thinking about. When a player fights with an opponent in PvP, the most important part is to identify the opponent's abilities, and also understanding what he can do with it. This predicts the outcome of the battle. Pastis's opponent had an ability with the condition. By fulfilling the conditions, the chance of activating the ability increases. Morgan's ability is activated when he drinks alcohol. When the ability is activated, time around him becomes slower. His opponent did not understand what was happening to his body. Morgan's art was called Drunkard's Style, and his punches were called Drunkard's Punches. Morgan realized that he had been drinking a little too much, and he decided to be more careful with his drink. Otherwise, he would stop thinking with his head. The intensity of the slowdown and its range depends on how drunk the guy is, and in some situations this has its pros and cons. In the first case, this made Pastis misjudge the limits of his opponent's ability. Morgan thought the guy was still trying to discover the range of his ability. The man realized that if Pastis continued to adapt to his blows, he would simply die. The correct identification of the limits of Morgan's ability lies in understanding its 3-dimensionality. This is a natural battle technique. No player will deny this statement. As a result, this concept is a factor that decides the outcome of the battle. The man gathered his strength and prepared to attack his opponent. At the moment of impact, an unknown creature appeared above Morgan, shouting that it was wrong. The guy didn't understand what it was and assumed it was his opponent's ability. Morgan didn't understand why it had activated only now, or what he meant by wrong. But the guy decided that it didn't matter what his opponent's ability was. As long as it was within his ability, he would have a huge advantage. Pastis strained his palm and rushed toward the opponent with all his might. His goal was not to harm him, but to snatch the mug of alcohol. Morgan was annoyed that the guy took his drink. Pastis opened the bottle and began to drink its contents. He was sure that this was the only way he could fulfill all the conditions. Morgan realized that he had completely underestimated his opponent, and that he was now dealing with a player from Group C. He grimaced and asked Pastis what he was going to do about it. Morgan called his opponent a fool and said that alcohol was not his ability. Unlike Pastis, Morgan's understanding of his opponent's ability was much less. The opponent realized this a long time ago and decided to take advantage of it. Pastis's ability is a conditional ability, similar to a stone, scissors, or paper. It's like you're playing with an opponent. She sets the conditions to predict the ending. But Pastis doesn't decide the final, the referee does, and then the question arises as to why the previous final was unsuccessful. For the conditional ability to work, the guy has to fulfill the conditions of the other player, and so Pastis fulfilled the conditions by drinking Morgan's alcohol. The guy felt that he could not move at all. This meant that his opponent had fulfilled all the necessary conditions. Pastis treated the guy like garbage and asked how long he needed to beat him to kill him. The next moment, the guy struck him an incredible number of blows. In this world, everything depends not only on your ability, but also on the ability to understand the abilities of another player. This is the decisive factor that determines the winner and the loser. That's what this battle was about. Thus, Pastis emerged victorious from the first player test tournament. Kina Lilith walked through the snowy terrain of a huge forest of fir trees. After the battle started, it got dark immediately, but when it started it was a clear day, and there was still a snow swirl, which meant that these were the anomalous phenomena of the open terrarium. Common sense told Lilith that she should stop searching and hide somewhere, because she would not be able to survive long with the warmth coming from her father. But time was running out, and the girl needed to find an opponent, which was almost impossible in one day. She didn't know what to do. Lilith told herself to stop whining and tried to collect her thoughts. She assured herself that she would never stop. After walking a few meters, she saw someone's human footprints in the snow. It was very strange because in a hurricane like this, there simply could not be clear traces. The girl asked her father what he thought about it, and he was surprised that she was really asking him. After a few minutes of thought, he replied that he thought Eddie Wyatt was good. Duke added that even though Eddie Wyatt is a slow thinker, he is not a weakling and looks quite nice. The father asked his girl who she was thinking about, and he was sure it was him. And it was the first time he had seen Kina so worried about someone. But Lilith angrily emphasized that she had already said that she did not like such jokes, and her father apologized, saying that he was just amused by her reaction. She turned the conversation back to the footprints and asked her father what they meant. The spirit replied that it was obvious that it was a trap and that it looked rather clumsy. He realized that the bait had worked not only on Lilith, but also on an enemy. Kina thought it meant that her father agreed with what she was thinking. The spirit replied that he agreed, and that these traces were a warning. A powerful explosion from the attack sounded in the place where Kina Lilith was standing. Kylie from the Avalon Guild was directing these attacks at her from the forest. The hit of events goes back to Eddie and Kaylee. The girl was sweetly resting on the grass. Meanwhile, her partner was training his body diligently. After completing a set of push-ups, the guy went to get his clothes. Eddie expressed hope that this training should be enough for him. The guy didn't even run in physical education classes, and now he's pumping his muscles. Lillian emphasized that he shouldn't miss training and warned him that she was watching him. Eddie noticed that his partner had finally woken up and asked how she slept. Kaylee began to stretch her muscles and said that she had slept well. Eddie asked what she was doing, and Kaylee said she was exercising, but she was doing it as if her fans were watching. At that time, someone was watching the children on one of the rocks. Eddie immediately felt his opponent's hostile gaze on him. Kali also felt his presence but could not see where he was. Shannon began to descend to his opponents, using the zoom skill. With his ability, the guy installed a huge red pipe. Shannon from the Flying Monkey class called his rivals idiots. Watching the battles, the examiners finally waited for the first tournament to end. Momo said that she would announce the outcome of the battle, and her colleagues hoped that she would decide everything fairly. The woman thought it was strange that the competition had started an hour ago and only one match had ended. Usually, the competition comes to an end by this time. Although it was Luna's merit, she did a good job on the battle schedule. One way or another, the examiner was forced to make the announcement much later than usual. And because of the tedious waiting, all the judges could sit with contorted faces. Momo wanted to see it as soon as possible. Each guild can officially hire only 3 fighters during one competition. The number is small, so the choice of each one is taken extremely seriously. The first match is a demonstration, so everyone can see what abilities the fighter from the rival guild has. In short, there was an invisible psychological war going on between the representatives of each guild. Momo entered the room and announced that she was about to name the first person to be eliminated. The judges approached the crossbar and started looking the other way. The examiner was extremely surprised to receive such a reaction. It was the first time she saw people looking the other way when the results were announced. She wondered what had caught their attention, and the woman also looked in that direction. On the screen, she saw Eddie Wyatt holding his opponent by the scruff of the neck. From birth, a person's life is controlled by fate, which prescribes his or her destiny. This is how important and unimportant roles are distributed. And who gets what fate depends on the characteristics you were born with. These are not ordinary words. The power of the power given from heaven depends on the qualities we acquire. Shannon believed that he was born to be a king. The transfer ritual was completed and the prince's power was blocked. The father told his son that from now on his skills could not be fully utilized. I asked if he still wanted to go out into the world. Shannon replied that yes, he didn't think he would need all the power there. He wasn't going to show it to people outside. The guy added that he really wants to return the flying cloud, the carpet, and all the other treasures that belong to them. He told his father not to worry, because everyone knows who the son of the owner of the planet Jaihande is. And it was after that that Shannon embarked on his journey. The father hoped that his son would return as a human being. From the moment he left the palace, the boy's journey began. On his way, he met many people whom he boldly called friends. I also met a girl whom I wanted to protect despite everything. There were times when Shannon was tempted to use force, but he fought this urge because it was not meant for such miserable things. But one day a certain person appeared on his path. He was a guy, Shannon thought, who didn't know his place. And by doing so, this guy made Shannon very angry. Because of Eddie, the guy had to use his strength. It was the 3rd peach in a row, and he ate them because his power was blocked. Shannon believed that it was right that such ill-mannered idiots as Eddie should be punished. He hoped that Eddie Wyatt had learned the lesson that he was not the main character on this stage. The simple thing did not happen as Shannon had predicted, and the next moment his tower was destroyed. Eddie did this with the help of his newfound power and the sword Excalibur. Shannon was instantly confused, not understanding how the guy managed to do it. The next moment, Eddie grabbed his face with the palm of his hand, and he threw the guy down to a neighboring rock. Eddie went down to the boy and put his hand around his throat. The judges watched them fight, and they knew that one of these guys was the son of the master of the planet Jaihande. They were amazed that Eddie had pinned down the flying monkey himself, not with technique, but with strength, and they wondered where he came from. Dean watched with admiration. He asked Ran what he had done. Ran replied that it was nothing special. He just helped the boy understand the well-known theory of force. Until then, Eddie Wyatt had been unleashing all the power he had, but now he had learned to control it. However, Ran wanted to point out that his power was just beginning to grow. Shannon was incredibly angry at this development. He said that if he could use his strength 100%, he would definitely defeat Eddie. But the opponent noted that Shannon still hadn't realized anything. Eddie didn't know why his opponent had such a hatred for him, but he offered to end the feud if the guy recognized that Eddie was stronger than him. However, Shonen only responded by sending him away. Eddie accepted this answer and told his opponent that he had asked for it. He took a swing at the guy and knocked him down with just one attack. Eddie Wyatt won the second match of the first tournament. Lillian sipped tea and asked how her children's exams were going. Given their abilities, she was sure it would be a piece of cake for them, but she was worried that they would overdo it. Lillian grabbed one little Mojiko and encouraged herself that everything was fine, because they were her students. Moreover, she left him a very useful gift. Kaylee could see that Eddie was barely able to stand. She wanted to warn him that if he passed out right now, it would look extremely stupid, but Eddie didn't hear her because he fell to the ground helplessly. The girl knew that this was how it would end, and she asked the boy why he didn't listen to her, because she told him to learn to control his power. Kaylee noticed blue marks on his face that grew larger over time. She assumed that it could be a side effect of overuse and thought it could be much worse than it was. Then Kaylee felt a light blue glow appear behind her. Eddie returned to the space he had already visited twice. When the boy opened his eyes, he saw God Arthur. Eddie did not expect to see him, so he jumped back in surprise. The boy started looking around and asked where he was and where Kaylee was now. Arthur was surprised that the boy had come up with an affectionate form of the girl's name. God answered that she had no reason to be here. The reason was that only Eddie died in the outside world. Arthur did not know whether he should congratulate the boy or express his condolences. But the fact that Eddie was here meant that a corpse had appeared in the open terrarium. He said more precisely that the guy was in the process of dying, but that he was going to die was obvious. Arthur said that if they met, now the boy could ask him anything he was interested in, and he would answer. Eddie remembered Excalibur sitting on a pile of junk that very day. The boy decided to ask why God Arthur left Kali alone. Arthur was surprised by such a stupid question, but Eddie emphasized that God himself said that he could ask him anything. He said that he was usually asked why he chose this person and what his goal was, although Arthur was not going to answer Eddie anyway. Then God confessed that he had called the boy because he had forgotten to tell him something. But then Eddie noticed that something strange was happening to his body. Arthur immediately realized what it was and recognized that Eddie was quite lucky. He did not think that the guy would choose such a method, breaking the rules. But Eddie couldn't understand what he meant by breaking the rules. Arthur realized that they were running out of time, so he decided to keep it short. He emphasized that the next time Eddie dies, he will have to answer for his own life. A moment later, Eddie woke up in the place where he had fainted. Kaylee was incredibly surprised when the guy finally woke up. Eddie said he didn't understand what had happened to him and asked Kaylee if she had made him come too. The girl replied that it was all thanks to his raincoat. When Eddie lost consciousness, his clothes began to glow, so Kaylee decided to cover his naked torso with them, and the boy immediately stood up. Kali haughtily said that she had saved his life so he could thank her. They sat down and began to think about what to do next. Kali asked if they were going to go to the desert as planned, but Eddie said he had changed his mind. Eddie said that they had gotten stronger through training, but he used all his endurance in this fight. If this continues, his weak body will not be able to withstand it any longer, and in the end, only death will be waiting for him. Kaylee didn't understand that the boy didn't like it because he had won. She just told him to become even stronger. The girl's cheeks turned red, and she asked her partner if she was wrong. Eddie stood up abruptly and said that Kaylee was absolutely right. He couldn't afford to just give up. The exam lasted 24 hours, and Eddie wanted to spend the rest of the time training. Meanwhile, Kina Lilith began her confrontation with Kylie. Kylie provoked her rival to see how she would react, but instead she just burned down half the forest. She thought it was stupid and began to synthesize a new arrow. After a few minutes of searching, Lilith was finally able to find out where her rival was. The girl abruptly moved to meet Kylie. The qualifications of a hunter are determined by 3 elements. These elements are the potential of the hunter, his environment, and the object of hunting. The phantom of a giant werewolf blocked Lilith's further journey. The girl was horrified to assume that her rival was in the same class. Lilith did not even notice when an arrow flew in her direction. It pierced the girl right in the shoulder. When analyzing 3 hunting targets, you need to make the target show a weakness. This whole process is called the hunt, and the Elves class and Group A announced that the hunt has now begun. Lilith started to run away, but her opponent quickly caught up with her. Kylie jumped up into a tree nearby. She noticed that her opponent was confused, even though it was only the beginning. She told Lilith that she had nowhere to go. The girl mocked her for falling into such an obvious trap. She didn't know what could be easier than hunting down an exhausted opponent. Kylie wanted to slowly and painfully strangle Kina Lilith. The location of the object is known to the hunter who is hiding from view. Kina could not determine what skills her opponent had. She also got a wound in her shoulder because she was losing her vigilance. Kylie also continued to attack her over and over again. In this way, Kini Lilith also has to support the Lich Spirit summoned from another dimension. If the Forest Spirit is there, he will be able to protect her in any situation. But that was exactly what Kylie wanted to achieve, to wear her opponent down as soon as possible. The Forest Spirit can be summoned once a day for a certain period of time. The period of time is determined by the power of the Forest Spirit. If an elf summons a strong Forest Spirit, then more stamina is required to control it. That is, if the victory depends on who can sustain the summoned Forest Spirit longer, then Kylie will definitely win. It had been 6 hours since the injury, and she thought Lilith should be tired of supporting the forest spirit. When the support of the venerable forest spirit Lilith is no longer in her power, then she will have to admit her loss to Kylie. The girl wanted to make it clear to her that the most important thing for an elf is how long you can sustain the challenge of the forest spirit. She believed that with her thin body, only an entry-level elf who did not realize the consequences could summon a forest spirit who could also speak. Higher-level elves do not rely entirely on the power of their forest spirits. They usually build a plan based on their abilities. Kylie believed that understanding such simple things was what set her apart from Lilith. Based on the footprints near the cave, she thought that Lilith had hidden there. If so, it's a very stupid mistake for Kinna Lilith. Kylie was already sure that Lilith had doomed herself to death like a mouse that fell for cheese in a mousetrap. But then she noticed that something strange began to happen to her spirits. Kinna turned to her rival and asked who was the mouse now. She thanked Kylie for chasing her so recklessly. The girl suggested that it should have been very funny, but said that unfortunately the hunting games were over. Kylie couldn't understand how her opponent had the strength to sustain the forest spirit summoning, since she would have to spend the entire duration of the summoning. But Lilith asked the girl in surprise how long it took to summon the forest spirit. Kylie could not believe what this could mean. She thought the girl was lying to her. The forest spirit Lilith apologized to her rival, warning that it would hurt. But he emphasized that his daughter was looking forward to this moment, and as a result of the first match of the Players' Tournament, Kinna Lilith became the winner. The examiners announced that 80% of the matches have been completed so far. In this regard, according to the decision of the Judicial Commission, Momo was going to announce the conditions of the final exam. Nabi from the White Ghost Knight Journey Guild noticed that natural selection had already ended. Louisa from the Northern Walk Guild added that all the fights were quite good. Her favorite was Pastis with the condition fulfillment skill. To win with this ability you need to think well. She believed that if a guy is well trained, he can become a good fighter. Louise noticed that Nabi didn't care who she chose. She knew she was amused that Avalon had lost. Nabi was simply amazed by this battle. She decided that she would definitely hire Kinna Lilith, no matter what it took. She was sure that the people at Avalon were confused, and Louise agreed that it was quite funny. They don't win on purpose, and don't move on to the next levels to help newcomers. It's a way to establish an elite. No one liked it, and it couldn't be called a fair method. It had long been clear that Avalon was short of fighters, and Louise didn't understand why they didn't want to stop pretending to treat their newcomers like barons. The vice president of the Avalon Guild heard interesting conversations of women. He came over and asked if he could join their conversations. It seemed to Sigmund that they had no people who would be treated like barons. He said that it was just a metaphor, and that it should be clear to everyone. The man noticed that one of their fighters was on the screen. The vice president told me to see with my own eyes what talents they had among Avalon's fighters. Ellis recalled that his opponent went with Addis Wyatt. With a smile on his face, he offered to share information about Eddie's abilities. He said that if the man politely shared it, he would die painlessly. However, before he could do anything, someone threw a sword at his opponent. A stranger approached Ellis and asked him if he was disgusted by mocking a loser. With an angry expression on his face, the guy asked the stranger who he was. By Ellis's cloak, the man realized that he was looking at the famous dog of Avalon. Darcy Brown of the Blade Masters and Group D class said that killing Ellis would not cause him remorse. After these words, Ellis immediately threw his sword at his opponent. He realized that he was being challenged to a duel, but the guy just wanted to try out some new tricks. His opponent had a blade, so Ellis decided to play along. With a single swing of his sword, Darcy sliced through his opponent's shoulder. The man noted that his opponent could do more than just scratch his tongue. However, it turned out that the figure in front of him was just an illusion. Darcy used his color blindness to see where Ellis was. When the boy found it, he immediately cut all the monsters into pieces. Ellis noticed his opponent and immediately began to defend himself. Using his smartphone, the guy was able to throw it back. Darcy recognized the lightsaber used by the 620th ranked student when summoning the examiner Grief and the defender's cloth. He realized that Ellis's ability was to copy other people's skills, and also that his weapon was a toy in his hands, and by the way Ellis behaved, one could guess that he could only use one copied skill. Darcy expected much more from him, but in reality Ellis is just a child playing with a toy. The next moment the guy rushed to Ellis and said that the games were over. He waved and told the young gift from Avalon to remember that in reality there is no second chance. With one kick, Darcy threw Ellis into the wall. Darcy took the boy's smartphone away from him, calling it a toy. He asked Ellis if he had anything else to surprise him with. On that terrible night, Darcy lost everything he had. One person once asked the guy if he wanted to turn back time. This man gave him hope, saying that there was one option. And that day I asked Darcy if he wanted to hear about it. The guy was holding a smartphone, and he realized that it was the same object that copies other people's skins. He admitted that he didn't really believe that such items really existed. The next moment, Darcy cut down the flying Mojiko, which was broadcasting the battle to everyone. Mojiko began to warn that intentional damage to the association's property is grounds for disqualification. But the boy didn't care. He trampled on the flying object so that it wouldn't beep anymore. Darcy told the young gift of Avalon that the battle was over. From that moment on, he asked me to answer his questions. Ellis asked the boy, laughing if he wasn't sick of being bullied by the loser. This reaction enraged Darcy, and he kicked Ellis in the head. The guy aggressively repeated that the battle was over and asked to answer questions. The first question was whether Ellis knew the whereabouts of Addis Wyatt. From his reaction, Darcy realized that the guy didn't know and hit Ellis again. While Ellis was catching his breath, he was about to ask the next question. With a crazy look, he asked where they came from. Ellis asked Darcy in shock how he knew about it. If he had told him earlier, they could have done without these games. Ellis asked the guy what he wanted to know. He boldly asked if he could pass on my regards to Arthur. Darcy was surprised and replied that Ellis was confused and that he was asking the question. This reaction made it clear to Ellis that Darcy was just a small patsy. After these words, Darcy's body began to be drawn to the earth. Ellis said he is currently using a 7th-level gravitational field. He emphasized that no matter who the guy was, he would not be able to leave him. Darcy did not understand how the boy managed to do it because he had his toy. Ellis picked up the phone and replied that Darcy should know that the fastest way to increase a player's level is through one-on-one combat. And he told me to think about who would fight you if it is not clear how to defeat you. For such cases, Ellis invented a fake weakness. He knew that fools like them would fall for it. Darcy did not expect his opponent to be so cunning. After that, he admitted his defeat and said that he had really miscalculated. He addressed the Mirage, saying that it could do whatever it wanted with it. A purple light began to appear around Darcy, and Ellis missed that it was some kind of hidden skill. In a very strained voice, the guy said that he had fulfilled the contract. So he asked to protect his people and his castle. The being that possessed the boy thought it was funny that the great commander was smeared by a schoolboy. Then he turned to Ellis and asked how Arthur was doing. With a shocked expression on his face, Ellis asked the creature who it was. The man replied that he didn't need to know and asked him to answer only one question. He mentioned Eddie Wyatt and asked which of the two was stronger. The riddle about the guy made Ellis incredibly angry, and he told his opponent that if he was so curious, he should try to check it out. After destroying half of his face, he said he would make him regret it. The man said that it was because of this character that it was impossible to find a common language with teenagers. But then I noticed that on the other hand, it was quite funny. He said that the words, "If you're interested, try checking it out," sounded good. The man told his partner that they would do what Ellis wanted. The examiner Momo began to announce the conditions of the final test. Pastas didn't understand what was happening to his body and why it started to disappear. Flying Mojiko announced that the exam was called the Boom Quest Party. Then it wished to become good friends with its partners. Eddie Wyatt was extremely surprised to see who was there. It was Keena Lilith, who was no less surprised than the boy. The examiners announced to the participants that the last one-on-one battle had just ended and that the last exam would begin from that moment. It's called Party in the Quest Boom, and now each participant will be sent to a specific location. It is in this city that they are to meet their partner. Kaylee asked Eddie if he thought the blonde man had survived, and he had no doubt about it. Mojiko announced that participants do not have to form an alliance with their partners, but they need to be in a team of 2 to pass this exam. This meant that it was advisable to become good friends with your partners. Momo added that she had already explained some of the rules and would explain others later. And after these words, she announced that the teleportation was starting. Eddie told his partner to be on the lookout because he didn't know who he was going to get, but she wasn't worried about that at all. Kaylee said that if they got that blonde, she would dye his head from yellow to red. When the teleportation was over, Momo wished to make friends with her partners. Lilith tried to remember what definition to give to this phenomenon. She just helped the guy because he couldn't cope with some simple task. But because of this, everyone around her started laughing at her and showing off. Also, Shannon has been around lately and has been standing over my soul. She remembered that it was called a sore eye. Eddie was extremely surprised to see Kina Lilith in front of him, and he wanted to ask what she was doing here. Lilith asked what the big deal was and why the guy should care what she was doing here. The forest spirit noticed that the girl was being too strict with her friend, and she gave him a disgruntled warning, so her father told her to do what she thought was right. Eddie started to apologize, saying that he didn't mean anything bad, and then screams came from the sky. It was Kaylee yelling at Eddie Wyatt to catch her. The guy fulfilled her request, and Kaylee liked the soft landing. The girl got down, saw Kina Lilith, and greeted her. Lilith had heard that in order to conclude a contract, you need to shake hands. When he and Eddie shook hands, Mojiko announced that they had entered into a partnership agreement. Kaylee was unhappy that she was forgotten in this test. Mojiko announced that they needed to reach their destination and try to keep the mark until the end of the exam. It emphasized that there should be no people lagging behind and said that this was all the rules. Lilith felt the monsters appear behind her and immediately turned to her father. But there was no need for that, because Eddie had slaughtered all the monsters in one fell swoop. Kaylee was furious that he was not taking care of himself and wanted to faint again, but Eddie insisted that he was fine. The forest spirit noted that the self-centered sword is a rare ability. Kaylee noticed the forest spirit Lilith and began to ask about him. The spirit explained that the power that Lilith uses is in him. Kali thought that this union was similar to hers with Eddie, but the forest spirit said that it was not. Eddie asked Lilith if she could see anything downstairs, but she told him to look for himself. It looked like a cave or a dungeon entrance, and if so, it's the best option for today, because it's better to go killing monsters than to be a target of enemies. Eddie called his other comrades, saying that there was something down there. They went down and approached the entrance to that cave. Kali and Lilith came in right away, and Eddie was afraid to go any further, and so they walked in silence for about half an hour. They finally reached a place where the road split into two. Eddie asked what they should do next, and Lilith said that they would also split into two groups. Hearing this, the forest spirit immediately had an idea. He asked Kaylee if she would mind going with him, and she had no objections. The forest spirit said to let Eddie Wyatt and Kina Lilith sort it out themselves. Her father said that he also sometimes wanted to rest, but Lilith was unhappy that he was going to split up for such a reason, choosing an inefficient balance of power. Then the forest spirit mockingly asked if Lilith was afraid to be alone with the boy. The girl was annoyed by these words and told him to do what he wanted. Kali asked the forest spirit why they had decided to split up in this way, and he replied that it was more fun. But the girl did not understand what was so funny about it. After a while, Kali and the forest spirit reached the end of the route. They realized they were at a dead end, so they decided to go back. On the way, the forest spirit asked the girl if she and Eddie Wyatt were close. Kali said yes, because she is his ego sword and he is its user. The forest spirit asked Kaylee if the fact that he was trying to bring Eddie and Lilith together was not hurting the girl. She asked in surprise why this should concern her. The spirit became more cheerful and said that he knew it, but Kaylee could not understand if something was wrong. He replied that he just assured me that he and Eddie were on good terms and expressed his regret that Lilith did not have the same friendship as the two of them. Kali was surprised to find out that Forest Dewey was not her best friend. The spirit replied that he had tried to be a father who was more like a friend, but if you think about it, it actually made Lilith withdraw from her friends. In addition, the girl has to carry an unbearable burden, and it only adds to her troubles. The forest spirit turned to Kaylee and asked her to take care of Lilith. In response, he received a sincere smile from the girl. Eddie and Lilith reached the door, which was guarded by headless armor. He noticed that the place was rather creepy. He asked his partner if they should wait for the two first and then open the door. But Lilith ignored him to his face, and Eddie began to miss Kaylee's grumbling. Then the girl noticed something on Eddie and asked him where he got his clothes. The guy replied that this cloak was a gift to him. Lilith said it looked like a pig wearing a pearl necklace. Eddie saw that the girl was about to open the door, and Lilith asked him if he knew how long it had been since the first exam had started. The guy replied that he didn't know, and Lilith said it was 10 p.m. The girl said she didn't know what her father was thinking when he decided to split up so stupidly. After all, if the time limit given to them from the very beginning is still in force, they have no time for childish pranks. Eddie grabbed Lilith's hand and asked her to wait. He said that maybe the girl was right, but reminded her that they were now doing a paired task. Eddie emphasized that it would be wise to wait for her father and Kaylee first, but Lilith asked him to let go of her hand. The guy did not understand why she was resisting and assumed that it was because of what her father had told her. After all, if she initially assumed that they didn't have time, why did she take his word for it and let them both leave? When he saw Lilith's reaction, Eddie was scared and realized that he was in trouble. The girl tensed her arm and swung in his direction. But as it turned out, she was not aiming at Eddie, but at the monsters behind him. Lilith grabbed the boy by the collar and told him to listen carefully. The girl emphasized that she was not him. Unlike Eddie, she could defend herself. She added that if the guy understood, he should stop talking and follow her in silence. At that moment, Eddie remembered an unpleasant memory from his school life, in which Ellis Kelly undoubtedly also participated. The guy asked Lilith why she treated him like that and what she didn't like about him. The girl replied that she needed to become a real player as soon as possible, so she didn't have time for friendship, and neither did Eddie. Lilia was surprised by the question of why she helped Eddie then. He emphasized that it happened not just once, but twice. Lilith sighed heavily, turned to the door and told Eddie to forget about it. The guy didn't like that she was running away from the answer again. He asked if it was really that hard for her to just talk. Lilith was very angry at these words. She turned around and told the guy to shut up. The girl emphasized that he knew nothing about her. Then she felt a monster reaching for her from behind. Eddie reacted in time, grabbing the girl and saving her. The hand reaching for Lilith began to disappear behind the door. The girl asked Eddie in confusion why he had saved her. The guy replied that Lilith was the first to give him a helping hand without knowing anything about him. He added that he just wanted to get to know her better, so he tried to talk to her, but she just ignored him. Eddie asked if it was really that hard to keep the conversation going. After this question, the girl immediately blushed. She looked down in shame, not knowing what to say. However, the next moment, Lilith noticed that Eddie was missing half of his leg. The guy didn't feel it at all, and when he saw it, he became very nervous. After that, he fell to the floor exhausted, and Lilith did not understand what was happening to him. Relationships are primarily built on trust, and this sweet moment is always followed by such a heavy burden as responsibility. When Lilith realized this, she had too much responsibility. She noticed Kaylee and her father approaching them. The girl immediately started screaming when she saw the wounded Eddie Wyatt. A forest spirit told him that Eddie's cup had broken. In this terrarium, when a fatal wound is received instead of bleeding, a bowl breaks. In this case, information flows out of the bowl. That is karma points. Callie asked how it could be stopped, but the spirit replied that in a normal situation there was no way. If Eddie doesn't have the ability to heal himself, there's no point in treating him because it will be useless. While Kaylee was sitting next to Eddie, the forest spirit asked Lilith what had happened. The girl explained that they had been caught off guard by the local Lord of Monsters, who was outside the door, and most likely it happened because she opened the door. Lilith said it was her fault that Eddie Wyatt was injured. That is why she did not like to interact with anyone. The forest spirit began to apologize because he believed that everything happened because he had gotten separated from them. Lilith remembered Eddie's words that the girl was running away from the answer again. I also asked if it was so hard for her to just talk. Kaylee turned to Eddie and told him to be patient. She believed that there was some way to cure him. Then she remembered the last time and wrapped the boy in a cloak. Kaylee began to pray that it would help at least one more time. After all, they had promised Lillian that they would return after they realized their dreams. Lilith approached Callie and asked if this cloak had ever shone. The girl was surprised that Lilith had found out about it and asked her if she knew anything about the cloak. But that was not the main thing now. Lilith repeated her question when he shone, and Kaylee answered that she had done it on the previous exam. Hearing this answer, Lilith said that the cloak would not help. She said that this cloak is made of threads of a rare material that is mined in this terrarium, and that the ability of this material is the ability to store and spend energy. She added that when using energy, it starts to glow. Lilith knew that a small accessory made of this fabric costs like a whole ship, and here was such a huge cloak. Callie asked what they should do now, and Lilith said not to worry. The girl said that in this case she had a plan. Lilith turned to her father and folded her arms over Eddie. The forest spirit emphasized that the girl should not forget that he could only help her, and that he could not help Eddie, because it would be a violation of the contract. Lilith knew this and remembered how Eddie was always playing the tough guy. She asked the boy if he thought that if he helped her once, she would become more submissive. Lilith told him to wait. She would make him get to his feet and then say everything she thought about him. Callie remembered that the fruit in Lilith's hands looked like the one eaten by the guy with the monkey's face and asked where she got it. The girl replied that she had been given it as a gift and she does not refuse what is given to her. It will help restore Eddie's cup. After these words, the girl took a bite of the unknown fruit. Then Eddie's leg began to recover very quickly. Callie was surprised that Lilith had actually succeeded. The girl bit her finger to release the blood, and the forest spirit guessed that she was going to share her cup with Eddie. Lilith hoped that if the boy had a part of her, his father would definitely be able to help him. After that, a large explosion erupted in the area where they were standing. After this explosion, Eddie began to slowly open his eyes. He saw Kaylee in front of him, who was incredibly happy that the boy had regained consciousness. Eddie immediately asked how Lilith was doing, but her father and the girl herself noticed that the boy had started his act again. She told the guy that if he was awake, he had to move on, and they didn't have time to linger. Kaylee and Eddie were incredibly surprised when they looked at Kina Lilith. After all, the girl now looked like a small child. Lilith asked her partners why they were staring at her. That day, amidst the flames and smoke, her father approached Lilith to apologize. He told his daughter that he could do nothing more for her but sacrifice himself and extinguish this misfortune. A crying Lilith asked where everyone had gone. She believed that all this happened because of her, because she ran away, and also that this could have been avoided if she had died. Her father stretched out his hand, saying that he would not be able to hug Lilith in reality anymore, but then he stopped and said that a part of him would always be with the girl. He wanted to stay with Lilith to carry this burden together. Carry it until the girl burns all her enemies. At this point in Lilith's memories, Eddie suddenly woke up. He realized that it was a dream, but everything looked very realistic. Eddie asked Lilith if she became small because she helped him. He did not understand what this meant, but the girl insisted that she had already explained everything. She reiterated that she used Chundo's peach to stop the boy's bleeding. Then Lilith shared her father's power with Eddie and restored his cup, and because of this she became small in stature. The girl reiterated that she had helped the boy by breaking all the rules, and he should understand what she had sacrificed for him. Eddie asked for a clearer explanation of what this bowl was, and Lilith was amazed that the boy didn't know such basics and didn't understand how he was going to survive here. The guy didn't know what was going on, but then he remembered a recent dream. The words I heard meant that the girl from the dream was Kina Lilith. Kaylee went over to Lilith and noticed that Eddie had already made the two girls look younger than their years. She wanted to explain that when she served God, she was also an adult, but then Eddie put his hand on her lips to stop her from speaking. The guy asked her in confusion why she was revealing the secret, but Kaylee didn't understand what the secret was because Kina wouldn't believe her anyway. They continued to argue, but Lilith did not understand what they were doing. Eddie replied embarrassedly that they were not doing anything and asked Kaylee to confirm this. Lilith turned to the boyfriend and told him not to worry about her body condition. She believed that if she had a good rest, she could recover quickly. Her skill had limitations, but she could use it a few times. She wanted to explain what it meant, but then Eddie came to the door. She angrily asked the guy if he was listening to her, and he said yes. Eddie asked if Lilith meant that after a while she would be able to go back to being the way she was before. He told the girl that she could not worry, because until she fully recovered, they would protect her. The children opened the door and saw a monster lord sitting on a throne. He angrily asked who they were and how they dared to disturb his peace. Lilith could not believe that she was seeing a monster that could think. Kaylee was also amazed that this monster could talk, and she asked Eddie if it was him who ate his leg. The monster lord told the children to get out of here because they disgusted him. Kaylee tried to remember what the teacher had told them, and Eddie assumed it was information about monsters above level B. Lilith told her friends to be more careful and that the master of the monsters could not go outside his room. She suggested that we first go out and come up with a plan to overcome it, but it was too late. Kaylee instantly transformed into a sword, and Eddie stabbed the monster in the arm. The boy asked Callie to remind him what the teacher had said. The girl replied that in a confrontation with a monster of level B and above, you can use all your power. Kaylee warned Eddie that if he fainted again, he would be in trouble, and he replied that he wouldn't because he had a great night's sleep. He recalled Ron's words that when using his ability, the main thing is the picture in his head. Eddie was about to imagine the strongest sword strike he had ever seen. The guy imagined a punch that would shatter any armor. One day, Lillian asked me to listen carefully. She said that the use of Eddie's skill was strictly prohibited. Eddie's skill is a special talent that a person is endowed with, also known as quick recovery, which Eddie used when he fought Lillian. This can also be called an innate skill. But using powers when you don't know what you're capable of is very dangerous, and you need to use skill to control them, so Lillian will teach him how to use one. Lillian reiterated that using force when it is not clear how it will affect Eddie is very dangerous, so the teacher forbade him to do so. Still, she did not deny that there is an exception when he can use his power. When a guy meets an opponent of level B and above, he can use his strength to the fullest to survive. Eddie pointed Excalibur in the direction of the enemy, who was about to grab it with his palms. The next moment, the Lord of the Monsters squeezed Eddie in his palms. But then something unexpected happened. Light began to emanate from his hands. The next moment, Eddie cut the obstacle he was in to pieces. He was going to concentrate everything into one point without throwing away his strength and recalling what he had seen in the past. The Lord of Monsters could not understand what was happening to his opponent. Eddie Wyatt informed Kaylee that he was launching an attack. The next moment, he pierced his opponent's body with his sword. After such an attack, it was blown to pieces. Lilith couldn't believe her eyes as she watched. Kaylee asked him not to lose consciousness again, and he told her to shut up. Then the boy turned his attention to a box flying down the mountain. A window appeared on this box with a message about clearing the secret dungeon. After that, they changed to a message that Eddie was being given a special reward. After that, the huge box began to open slowly. At that time, other candidates for the game were fighting on the Bavi Mountains. His partner told Pastis that they should stop and just give up. But the guy replied that she was talking nonsense because he didn't know the word. After that, he told her to sit quietly and watch. But the next moment, nothing happened, and Pastis began to regain consciousness. The guy embarrassedly admitted that he was sober now. After that, the stone monster hit the boy in the stomach. This attack made the guy fly back a few meters. The opponents told the children that they did not know how to learn from mistakes, and this was confirmed by the fact that they had already hit the same target several times, but did not leave a scratch on their dolls. Phoenix from Group D and Jonesy from Group A said that their alliance was invincible and suggested that their opponents not to fight and give up in a good way. Pastis noticed that their opponents were quite nasty. The doll's arms were moving too fast and he didn't have time to see and use his skill. This scenario was very unfavorable for the guy. The Phoenix felt that it was difficult to control such a large doll and wanted to end this battle as soon as possible. But Pastis has not yet shown them his ability. So before the guy tries to do anything, the rivals decided to put pressure on his morale. The Phoenix told the girl that even if her partner by some miracle broke his doll, it would not negate the fact that there were many stones nearby and he could easily create a new one. In this way, he wanted to prove to them that the conditions were not at all in their favor and offered to surrender. But Pastis was not going to give up so easily, so he finally used his ability. Phoenix realized that it would not be possible to come to a good agreement, and he expressed his regret about this. The opponent emphasized that he had already said that he did not know the word for surrender. Then he turned to the sculptor and said he was calling him. Pastis told him to attack and assured him that he would smash all his creations. Jonesy liked the offer and said that he would smash the guy with his fists made of stones. The Phoenix realized that their opponent was up to something, but didn't have time to report it. The next moment, he and his partner found themselves standing over a huge hand. Pastis thanked his opponent for trying to move his brain, because thanks to him, he fulfilled the condition. With a satisfied expression on his face, the guy announced that he had won. Ellis saw that this was the guy with the ability to fulfill the conditions. The guy suggested to his partner that they would have a worthy opponent. His partner was absent from the Avalon training group. The man's task was to help Ellis Kelly, Avalon's talent, safely move on to the next round. After all, there should be no obstacles on the way of elite players. Even before that, it was assumed that Kylie would lose, which would allow Ellis Kelly to avoid matches with strong players. As soon as the paired quest started, Absent eliminated his partner. Then he went to the previously discussed place to wait for Ellis Kelly. Absent told the guy that the search for the way to his destination was complete and suggested moving on. However, now Ellis's attention has been drawn to two other players. He watched them fight and realized that he had the same ability to fulfill conditions. There should be no obstacles on the way of the elite, but unfortunately they always exist. Ellis turned to Absent and asked the man how strong he thought he was. The man replied that the concept of strong is ambiguous and includes many factors, but if we compare pure power, Ellis's strength is equal to an A-level master. The guy took this answer to mean that Absent was saying that apart from this factor, he was not an A-level master in other aspects. Ellis asked the man sternly if he had understood him correctly. When he received silence in response, he realized that he needed to check it out. He asked Absent not to interfere with him and said he would deal with the guy himself. When Ellis Kelly entered the world of the webtoon The Player, he felt the need to learn the difference between this world and reality. The biggest difference was in the existence of such concepts as karma, bowl, and circulating energy. Ellis thought he had a good understanding of what these concepts meant because they were frequently encountered in the weblogs he read. But in reality it wasn't. The guy has an incredibly great power, but in practice he can't even use half of it. And when he fought stronger opponents, he could barely hold out to the end. The guy realized that he needed to become stronger. Ellis believed that in order to do this, he needed to gain experience. He concentrated his strength in his spear and aimed at Pastis. At that time, his partner was helping him up. Pastis immediately felt something approaching him. When fighting Dean, Ellis felt a huge strength and is currently trying to understand what the limit of his abilities are. To a certain extent, the guys managed to understand what he was capable of. The guy can only copy skins from webtoon characters. He can use only one each time, and he is currently using a spear that was ranked 73rd. Ellis could use each skin only once a day and was responsible for the risk of undesirable consequences. The guy realized that the opponent's skill was similar to his, copying, and the only difference was that Pastis had to fulfill a condition to use the skill. After stopping the attack, Pastis had a hard time asking the guy who he was. Ellis noticed that the opponent did not do the rock, scissors, paper pose, which may mean that he needs another special condition for this, and that distance does not matter either. He decided that in this case he should use another ability, communication. Pastis realized that now he was looking at the guy who had fought Eddie Wyatt, who was much more talkative back then. He also realized that his opponent knew about his ability. Pastis had no choice but to do his best. The course of events returns to Eddie and his friends, and rewards have begun to fly out of the box. Depending on their achievements, each of them was given different rewards. Lilith was given the Tears of the Blue Dragon unique to restore her strength. She could not realize whether this was really possible. The next moment, her body returned to normal. Lilith felt that she had not only returned, but had become stronger. She was surprised that she had not helped the murderer in any way, but was rewarded with such a reward. The girl was also interested in what Eddie Wyatt was given at the time. He saw a book locked in front of him. Kaylee told her partner that this book looked very strange. She could not explain it, but she felt a divine power. The lock came off, and then an unfamiliar object appeared in front of the boy. This item was epic and had its own name, the player's symbol. Arthur was pleased that the guy finally touched it and recognized that it was a good job. He said that it was time to reveal the class of Eddie Wyatt. He received a notification that the user Eddie Wyatt had been accepted for recognition. And then came the announcement that Eddie Wyatt's class was a player. Dean came out of the restroom complaining of fatigue. Even simple observation is very hard work. He was curious about how the guildmasters endured this monotonous work and wanted to see if anyone else had something more interesting to do. When Dean got out, he heard someone on the road asking him to give way. These were the men who almost knocked him down, and they apologized for it, saying that they had a very urgent matter. Dean assumed from the uniforms that they were the people responsible for the resurrection, and he wondered what had happened and why they had run there. But then he had a strange idea that something interesting was waiting for Dean. The man responsible for the resurrection told the examiners that they had to stop the tournament. Luna expressed hope that he hadn't distracted her to say that. Momo asked her partner to calm down and told her to listen to him. The man responsible for the resurrection expressed his gratitude for understanding. He said that Darcy Brown from Group D lost to Ellis from Group A. He crashed the drone on purpose, so they wanted to resurrect it for a conversation and to decide on the punishment. The words that the boy could not be resurrected and that he had died shocked the examiners. Bianca couldn't believe it and asked her husband again if he had checked everything well, and he said that of course he had, because he had been doing this all his life. He said that when an object dies in the terrarium, it is resurrected at the sacred altar of the appropriate level, and this is unchanged. Luna answered that this place where they were was the only sacred altar of this level, and if the boy did not rise again here, it meant that he died forever. Bianca tried to object, because death does not exist at the terrarium, and if it did happen, it was the first time in its history. Momo told her colleagues in a stern tone that they were stopping the tournament. She said that from now on, all their efforts will be directed to finding the cause and ensuring the safety of the players. Dean said that this was quite reasonable, but said that he was against it. Momo told the boy that outsiders were not allowed to enter, even if he was second in the player rating. Dean apologized and explained that he had gotten lost while looking for the restroom, and reiterated that he was against stopping the tournament. The guy approached the examiner and said that he had an idea. He asked if they wanted to listen to him. Pastis continued to resist Ellis Kelly's attacks. It was very difficult for him, and he tried to protect his partner to the last. Ellis realized that his opponent was using the same skill, and he couldn't save other copied skins along the way, which meant that he was no match for him. The guy realized that there was no point in continuing the fight, and it was time to end it. If Pastis had nothing to show him, then let him prepare to die. However, Pastis was not about to give up. He swung the hammer he was holding. Its impact caused severe destruction and deformation of the ground. Ellis didn't understand why his opponent was wasting his energy on a shot that didn't even reach him, and assumed that he wanted to destroy the mountain or quickly escape. But then he rejected these assumptions because it's not too inefficient, because in this blow, Pasi probably used up all his strength. Ellis could tell by the expression on his opponent's face that he was challenging him. The guy was pleasantly surprised by such extraordinary thinking of his opponent, and decided that he should remember it. Elias told Absinthe that he would be there soon. The man told him to be careful. Absinthe thought he was a fool for falling for some kind of provocation. He hoped it would teach him something. After all fighters who have the ability to fulfill the conditions are very difficult natures. Any ability has small or large conditions that need to be met, but there was still something that distinguished fighters with the ability to fulfill conditions from them. The difference lies in the difference of attitude, that is, in the warrior's understanding that he has the ability to fulfill the conditions. In this case, it turns out that the fighter creates another condition for himself. When fulfilled, he gets an effect that defies reasonable explanation, and repetition generates enormous power. Such people have a mindset that their own self is above all else. And it is the choice based on this egoism that is Pastis's strength. Ellis was extremely dissatisfied with his opponent's insolence. He barely had time to notice how he was going to attack him from behind. At this time, Kaylee, Eddie, and Lilith continued their journey, exploring the area, and it so happened that they realized they had finally reached their destination. Lilith was surprised to learn that Eddie's class was called a player. She had never heard anything like this before, and her father noticed that it was also the first time he had heard such a class. But the girl was even more surprised by the fact that Eddie had no class until then. She thought that his class was related to the use of the Sword of Ego. Kaylee was extremely surprised to hear that there is a class related to the control of the Sword of Ego. Letit said that there have always been players using his sword, the most famous among them being the legendary Lord of the Blade and the Great Mage, who is ranked 8th in the ranking of the strongest players. She realized that there could be more, but she assumed that Eddie was the only one using his sword. This meant that there was someone else besides Kaylee, even though she thought she was the only one. Eddie remarked that it would be great to have the opportunity to meet them, and Kaylee agreed. The forest spirit was still amazed that Eddie could kill a monster lord with one blow, and he had no class, and he was afraid of the boy's potential. Her father hoped that Lilith would not be too upset by comparing herself to him. The girl told her friends that they should keep their class a secret. But Eddie didn't understand why. He wanted to ask around, because maybe someone knew something about it. Lilith came closer and said in a stern tone that this was not allowed. The girl explained that class is how you perceive yourself, and when your perception becomes incredibly powerful, you are assigned a class. She had never heard of anyone being assigned a player class before, and Lilith asked Eddie if he knew what would happen if the other players found out. "Except for me, all the other players are fake. That's how they will perceive his words." Lilith again asked him not to tell anyone about it, unless he wanted to make more enemies. Eddie apologized because he hadn't thought about it at all. He said he would do as the girl advised, and Lilith was glad that at least this time he didn't argue. There was something in his friend's words that bothered him. After all, she said that all the players would think so. Eddie asked Lilith what she thought about him being a great player. The girl was surprised because the boy was assigned this grade against his will. If Eddie had evil intentions, he wouldn't have told the girl about his class, and he's not the kind of person who would be smart enough to make such plans. She said that the boy was not determined and was unlikely to have reached such heights on his own, that he was assigned a grade as a result of purposeful actions. She added that even if Eddie believed that he was the only one who was a real player, she didn't care, because only people with such ambitions become real players. Eddie was even embarrassed to hear this answer and said that he understood. The Forest Brass player admitted that even though she was his daughter, Lilith did not have the courage to come forward. He thought that the girl should have just said that she believed in Eddie and asked Kaylee if he was wrong. She looked at Eddie and Lilith talking to each other. Kaylee said, embarrassed, that she didn't even know what to say to that. Right before the shot, Ellis was able to use his ability and block Pastus's attack. The opponent threw away his spear and tried to break through the defense with his bare hands. However, he failed and moved back a few meters. Pastus realized that his strength was already running out and that this attack would likely be the last. But the guy had a plan and hope, so he decided not to back down. Ellis was going to block the opponent's attack with his defense. If Pastus understood correctly, this shield can protect the boy. But this only applied to the objects he was looking at. Ellis barely managed to dodge 2 attacks flying at him. Pastus finally saw his opponent's eyes darting around. Ellis immediately reacted to the blow and ducked back. The guy was amazed that his opponent was able to realize his weakness in a short time and launch a counterattack. The boy was stronger than anyone Ellis had ever met with his insight, accuracy of thinking, and speed of reaction. But he still believed that Pastus was unable to defeat him. With a smile on his face, the opponent said he could see through Ellis. He addressed him saying that the guy thought he was invincible. Pastus decided to give Ellis some advice, saying that with this attitude, he would never be able to beat Eddie Wyatt. At the destination, Eddie's company did not expect to see Dean there. They couldn't understand where the second runner came from. Dean greeted the children warmly and said that they were the first ones here, and Lilith was impressed that Eddie knew the second-ranked player. The guy was surprised because he thought he had told Lilith about it, and she was very unhappy. She started to argue with the boyfriend because he was hiding so much from her. Eddie asked her to calm down and assured her that he was not hiding anything else. Then Dean told the examiners that if they didn't stop the tournament, there would be a disaster. Luna was extremely surprised because he had just said that he was against stopping the tournament, and Dean replied that if they stopped the tournament, they would lose the right to referee anyway. He said that Avalon is most likely to be credited with this death in the tournament, and they will not miss this opportunity. Dean suggested that if they believe that the current judging panel did not live up to expectations and the situation raises big questions, Avalon will ask to stop the tournament for safety reasons. The guy said that they would continue to prove by all possible means that women are not worthy of further tournaments, and as a result, they would be deprived of the right to judge and select new players. Dean emphasized that as soon as the female examiners show a weakness, Avalon will eat them, and death at the tournament is a conspiracy to gain control of the terrarium. Luna replied that if Dean was going to claim that there were conspiracies, he should first show proof of this. Bianca said that von Sigmund, as a man of Avalon, always appears at the most unexpected moment in the most unexpected city. The woman realized that his appearance at the tournament was the most compelling proof. Dean asked the female examiners if they would continue to behave like obedient dogs, or if they would believe his version of the conspiracy. The examiner Momo asked the man to answer one question. She wondered why he decided to help them. The woman said that depending on his answer, they would decide what to do next. Dean replied that his reason should be obvious. The plot shifts to Ellis's fight with Pastus, and Ellis admits that he learned a lot from his opponent. He would have liked to have had more fun with him, but time was running out, so he had to finish. Pastus knelt exhaustedly in front of the boy's figure. Ellis held out his hand and told him to get up, that he would help him get to his destination. When the guy hooked up with Pastus, he realized that it was worth going all the way. Ellis asked his opponent to take his hand and promised that he would do nothing. But Pastus responded by pointing a scissor-folded fist in his direction. Ellis was sure that the guy didn't have the strength left to fight him, and it was over. Pastus mockingly asked his opponent who had told him this. Pastus's partner appeared behind Ellis and ordered him not to move. With a powerful blow, she threw the guy into the nearest rock. Pastus asked Daniela if she had found her destination, and she said yes. She thanked her partner for holding out for so long. Daniela grabbed the boy and the two of them ran away. Only bright traces of their escape remained. All this time, Absent was watching their side. He admitted that it was a complete failure for Ellis Kelly. Ellis thought that he was much stronger than Pastis, but he had the feeling that from the very beginning he was just playing with him. The guy decided that he would definitely beat him next time. At this time, Examiner Momo announced the last exam. She announced that Dean would be the judge of the last exam and that he would decide the conditions, and that he had been chosen by the panel of examiners. The woman said that the second-place player, Dean, in order to ensure the impartiality of the judging, refused to recruit players to his guild. Dean promised that he would continue to play alone, and even Ran had a hard time believing what he was hearing. And finally, Momo had to convey his words to the audience. Dean said that if someone doesn't like it, let them duel, he's always ready for it. The reason Dean decided to help the examiners was very simple. He was obsessed with the desire to puff up von Sigmund. Avalon's vice president admitted that he had indeed been cheated. The examiners did not know what Dean was up to. But in any case, it had already started, so they wanted him to be careful. The players who reached their destination lined up in front of the judge of the last exam. Dean announced to the participants that he assumed no one else would join them. So after these words, he announced the start of the last exam. Von Sigmund is an enigma. Absolutely nothing is known about him, neither his face, nor his age, nor his past. All they knew about him was that he was officially a player, and that it also ranks 8th in the ranking and is considered a substitute for Avalon. And not many people knew that Sigmund was a master of the ego sword. But it is also worth noting that nothing is really known about his sword. Sigmund ordered Lucia to leave, and she was incredibly mocking because her husband had been tricked. She had already told her husband earlier that her prediction was coming true, and Lucia suggested that they fight together as before, because she could easily kill the second-place winner. Lucia really wanted the ruler to finally release her, but Sigmund told the girl that this would never happen. Lucia looked at the owner with a bewildered expression, and after that, her figure disappeared into the darkness. Sigmund personally tried to postpone their meeting with Dean for as long as possible, but he did not expect Dean to dare to provoke a fight himself. The man was disappointed that nothing in the world is easy. He didn't want to, but he had to use the trump card. But Sigmund realized that nothing could be done now. After all, he has no other choice now. The man realized that as a last resort, he would have to use force. The members of Avalon's secret squad were looking at the same guy who was ranked 2nd in the ranking. They had never heard from Shinguru that there was such a guy here before. Daisy asked what if they all rushed at this guy together, would they be able to kill him? Arnold replied that she was crazy and they would not be able to overcome him because they were like 2 fingers on the asphalt to him. Then Daisy asked what would happen if Shinguru fought him. But no one knew the answer to this question anymore. Raven told his colleagues to talk only after the mission was completed and that their plan had not changed. Despite the unforeseen circumstances, the tournament is still going on, which means that everything is going according to plan, and they believe that Mr. Shinguru had foreseen everything. Raven said that once the raid, which is the last exam, begins, they will find a weakness. Their task is to wait for that moment and grab the object they need. Lilith said that the last exam is traditionally a raid, and they should never be the first to fight. Kaylee suggested that this was because they were slow to recover, and that Lilith suggested they should not speak first, but keep a safe distance. The girl was embarrassed to say that it was true. It was very strange that they agreed with her right away. This behavior of the two was more alarming than reassuring. Before the exam started, Eddie mentioned that he wanted to ask Lilith something. He picked up the artifact he had received in the dungeon. A window appeared in front of him with an offer to enter the dungeons of the past. And judging by the fact that no one says anything about it, only Eddie sees this window. The guy wanted to ask Lilith after the exam is over. Dean stood up from his seat and asked for everyone's attention. After he said that, a huge monster appeared in the arena. The students thought that the exam had already begun without any warning, and that Dean was just mocking them. The fierce monster jumped right into the crowd of students. Eddie felt incredible pressure. He had no idea how they were going to beat him. Looking at Dean, he didn't know if they could beat him at all. The man didn't like the noise the monster was making, so he took a swing at the terrible monster. And the next moment his body shattered into small pieces. Dean looked at the destroyed enemy with a look of contempt. The students just froze at that moment. They didn't know how to react. Daisy laughed because Dean killed the monster himself. Because it would be impossible to pass the last exam, she thought the guy was really stupid. Arnold realized that they were in a lot of trouble and asked the commander what they should do next. In a stern tone, Raven replied that now they just had to wait. Daisy realized that Dean was stronger than them, but it seemed to her that the guy didn't even know they were here, so the girl offered to just go there and take their object. The students asked Dean why he had killed the raid monster and what they should do now. They didn't like the fact that in this way he wanted to brag that he was cooler than them, because it was just mockery. Dean grudgingly replied that they just had to wait and that the object they were supposed to catch was not the noisy leech. He emphasized that the object itself would soon come here, and Eddie could not understand what this meant. But the very next moment, one of the members of the secretive Avalon Guild was behind him. Daisy was looking at Eddie Wyatt and told him he was very cute, but before she could do anything, Dean appeared over her and wrapped his legs around her neck. The guy asked the embarrassed Daisy who she was. The examiners received a message about the lack of signal. They realized that the connection with the drones had been cut off and something had happened. The drones are a waste product created by the terrarium's power. They have simply been given the ability to communicate, but there are so many of them that even the Federation cannot tell their exact number. There are at least several 100,000 of them, and the absence of a signal is even theoretically impossible. But still, this impossible thing happened, and someone was responsible for it. The women knew that only those outside the rankings were capable of such crazy actions. Recently, we hadn't heard anything about them at all, and then they reappeared. One of the guild masters asked the examiners why they stood up, as they had to stop the tournament. But before Momo could answer, Sigmund approached the man and told him to calm down. Avalon's vice president said that in a normal situation he would have agreed with the man, but now he was missing the most important point, namely that a second ranger is now with the students. If Dean can't handle them, they can't handle them. So Sigmund suggested that we observe a little more. The moment Dean grabbed Daisy by the neck, she realized something, namely that she made the wrong decision. Before that, the distance between Dean and the place where Daisy was standing was at least 1 kilometer. If the boy had a well-developed sense of smell, he would have recognized the location of the enemies immediately, but Daisy assumed that Dean was unable to sense their presence. The reason for this naive thinking was that he never looked in her direction. Oddly enough, she was right. He really couldn't recognize where the enemies were, or rather, there was simply no need to. The only thing that concerned Dean was the location of the newcomers, who were within 30 meters of him, and he was easily ready to defend this area. Daisy was impressed by the boy's confidence, as he hadn't thought about them at first. The girl realized that she had to run away and hoped that he would chase after her. From his observations, Ellis concluded that this girl's ability was related to space management, which was a rare gift. But there was a more important thing he noticed in the girl's aura. Daisy had the same shade of purple, which meant that she was somehow related to Darcy Brown. Dean asked the girl if she was sure about introducing him to all her friends. But Dean's expression immediately changed when he heard his name called by Eddie Wyatt. The guy thanked him for defending him and said he would also fight. Eddie saw that Dean's eyes had changed somehow, and he couldn't understand what was happening. The man replied that he liked it and told Eddie Wyatt to go with him. Ellis thought Eddie was a fool, because he didn't even know who the enemy was, and if so, the guy was going to go with them. But his intentions were interrupted by Dean's voice, which called him ignorant. Dean boldly asked the boy if he knew he was the strongest among the newcomers. The man emphasized that he would be back in exactly 5 minutes. He said that Ellis would remain in charge while he was away. Eddie ran after Dean and asked him to wait. The guy ran as fast as he could to the portal, which was about to close. Eddie Ellis considered such behavior to be common cowardice. Then Arnold jumped from the mountain where the criminals were sitting to the players. The newcomers could not understand what awaited them this time. Arnold called the children chickens and expressed hope that he had given them enough time to prepare. The man was very excited because it was the first time he had come to such an official event. So he asked the children to die in advance. After these words, a fireball immediately flew into the man's face. It was Daniela's attack, and she reacted incredibly quickly. Its impact caused a powerful blast wave and bright light. Daniela was pleased because she thought she had hit the nail on the head. However, it turned out that Arnold held off her attack with his teeth. She could not understand how this was possible. Arnold started chewing on a fireball and asked the girl if this was her signature trick and if it hurt her to perform it. He admitted that this was not bad for a beginner and that her other colleagues did not even see the fireball fly. In a crazy tone, the man asked if anyone else wanted to try to attack him. Daniela recognized that she was facing a real monster. The girl began to kneel down powerlessly in front of him. Eddie and Dean teleported after Daisy to an unfamiliar place. Eddie asked the man if he knew the place. He didn't know where they were, but he was sure they were on the tower grounds, and also that this territory belongs to their enemies. Dean knew that they tended to think that this gave them a certain advantage, but no matter how confident they were, he would still win. Sometimes the power belonging to the players can be too destructive to be owned by just one person. In this regard, the players made a promise to each other that they will not hide classes among themselves. Such a measure was taken not because of the destructive force, but because of the anomaly that this force can create. Classes provide information about the player's ability and thus, if necessary, make it clear how to defeat him. When disclosing information about the class, it was necessary to identify how strong the players were, and for this purpose, a rating system was created. In this way, the players gained honor and glory, and the society gained security. These are the measures that hold society together in the terrarium. But unfortunately, there were individuals who did not fulfill these promises, and they were nicknamed unrated players. Arnold asked the players who was next and whether no one would dare. Pastis approached Daniela and told her to come to her senses. After all, only the object changed, but no one cancelled the exam itself. He emphasized that all of them were preparing to fight monsters when they came here. I asked my partner if he was telling the truth. Ellis also confirmed that Pastis is absolutely right. He was the brave one who was going to attack the opponent. His attack caused a powerful explosive wave. Ellis announced that anyone who thinks they can't cope can leave right now and he won't keep anyone. But another option was that they could try to take down the opponent together. However, after this attack, Arnold made it back without any problems. This situation was not at all part of Ellis Kelly's plans. The guy was able to hold his opponent with this punch for only 5 seconds, although he expected 30 seconds. He did not understand how Dean dared to leave such a gorilla on them. Ellis assessed this situation as a hopeless situation. He also came to an absolutely identical conclusion when he measured himself against Pastis. Ellis decided that he would stick to the strategy of striking once every 5 minutes and not necessarily killing, and if possible, he would try to find out information about Shinguru through communication. At this point, Ellis Kelly realized that his abilities had begun to grow. Unfortunately, this time he was very unlucky with his opponent. Arnold turned out to be much faster than the guy expected. But the next moment, other players rushed to Ellis's aid. Together, they managed to stop the opponent for a while. Ellis couldn't believe his eyes and didn't understand why they did it either. Lilith shoved the boy in displeasure after this question. Ellis asked the girl if she wanted to fight him, and Lilith indifferently asked if he knew what a raid was. She asked the boy if he thought they were only helping him because he had become very sympathetic to them. The girl was unhappy that Ellis hadn't yet realized that he wasn't special and told him not to have any illusions. And she emphasized that if he wants to win, of course. Now Kinna's father Lilith was competing with Arnold. Arnold was not afraid of the forest spirit's fire, which could mean that he possessed the ability of fire resistance. The spirit would have liked to raise the temperature of the fire, but he was already putting a lot of strain on his daughter. However, he didn't have to worry about it, because the next moment Arnold began to burn with an even stronger flame. The forest spirit began to think about where the flame came from, and assumed that it was from Lilith, wondering what she was up to. The artifact she received in the dungeon made her stronger, but even so it was not like her. In an aggressive voice, Lilith shouted that she was fed up with everyone. She didn't like the fact that no one ever consulted her, they always did things their way, and that they expected Lilith to just stand quietly on the sidelines because she didn't know how to do anything. The girl emphasized that she was not going to take it anymore and would show Eddie Wyatt as soon as he returned. My father was embarrassed to realize that it was just an outburst of rage. The commander was watching the whole mountain. He was impressed by Lilith's power, and it was a pity to kill her here. The man missed the fact that he might have sent Arnold first because he was just mocking the players. The commander ordered the newcomer to get ready. She forgot his name. She emphasized that this is not so important now. Lidit continued to burn the enemy's body, but he held on. The forest spirit was amazed that even a flame of such power did not defeat Arnold, and he assumed that his ability to do so was somehow related to self-defense, and perhaps he possessed the ability to fulfill conditions. Lilith asked her opponent if he was hot, and emphasized that she hadn't even broken a sweat yet. She wanted to not just grind it into powder, but to make sure that not a single speck of dust remained. The forest spirit realized that Lilith wanted to use another trick, but he was worried that it might hurt her friends. He asked Kina to stop, because first he needed to find out what ability the opponent had. Lilith apologized and emphasized that she was not going to stop. The father emphasized that he had repeatedly told the girl that she should not use her abilities based on emotions alone. Suddenly, Arnold jumped out of the flames and asked the girl if she hadn't expected it. The father immediately rushed to Lilith to protect his daughter. The opponent congratulated the elf, emphasizing that she would be the first. But his intentions were not destined to be realized, because Ellis came to save Kini. The guy finally found a weak spot in Arnold's defense, and thus he was able to conduct a successful attack. Before the fight, Lilith said she was giving Ellis 1 minute to go away and come up with a plan. She expected that the guy wouldn't just wait 5 minutes for the second runner to return, and the girl emphasized that she would hold out for 1 minute, and she instructed Ellis to try to come up with a plan to defeat Arnold during this time. The guy analogized Lilith to Edis, and they deserve each other. Daniela told Pastis that he could no longer fight, but he asked what she suggested he do, because a man should be responsible for his words. Then Ellis approached them and asked the boy if his name was Pastis. He returned to the owner of the skill with the conditions fulfilled and asked what he needed to do to defeat this bastard. Pastis was impressed by this audacity and told Ellis to ask the man he was walking with. Ellis replied that Absinthe could only observe whether the boy was worthy of becoming a man of Avalon. Pastis asked the boy why he had come to him. Ellis answered because he believed that he had no one else to trust but the boy among them. And then he added that he thought Pastis would definitely need him to win. Ellis emphasized that he would do as Pastis says and only need to be told what to do to win. Pastis had already guessed what kind of ability his opponent had and suggested that Ellis would easily be able to defeat him. But he emphasized that in order to verify the accuracy of his guess, certain conditions must be met. Pastis imposed about 3 conditions on Ellis. The first condition was to treat him with respect. As a second condition, he wanted Ellis to follow his orders without objection. And the third condition was that Ellis had to tell Pastis what abilities he had.